Release that witch eye by Ermu. Chapter 581, Late Night Talk. Late at night, Wendy called all of the witches into her bedroom. The usually spacious room was now packed. It felt like déjà vu. A year ago, Wendy had done the same thing. She had gathered all of the witches to inform them of the situation in Border Town and quell their uneasiness. At that time, only 7 of their sisters were able to escape from the barbarian lands. The witches were left traumatized, and were unsure and afraid of what was in store ahead. Many came to Border Town with a mentality that we've suffered so much that whatever happens next is a blessing. To them, survival itself was a difficult game, not to mention dealing with the church which perpetually hung over their heads like a shadow. This time, the looks and feelings of everyone in the room were completely different from a year ago. At present, the witches' consideration was gradually shifting away from focusing on survival to maintaining their relatively carefree lives. There were no more oppression and hostility from other people. And no more worries about food and safety. In essence, this place had become the witches' holy mountain. Furthermore, if they could help His Majesty Roland to defeat the church successfully, all of their nightmares would vanish and they would be truly liberated forever. Wendy waited until everyone's eyes were fixed on her before she began. The church is coming. The daytime meeting did not offer much in the way of intelligence. Wendy quickly finished telling the witches about the contents of the secret letter, and the room fell into an awkward silence. Will His Majesty win? After some time, Mystery Moon asked almost inaudibly. I'm willing to spend all of my time generating electricity for him at the factory area. Oh come on, His Majesty would have to arrange someone to take care of you if so. Lily smirked. It's best you don't give him more trouble at a time like this. What trouble? The witches in the room started to laugh. Now that the first person had spoken, more and more voices were heard in the room. I'll work even harder to produce white liquor. Evelyn resolved. But, would so much liquor be needed while we're at war with the church? Is that so? I believe His Majesty won't lose. Didn't Carter also manage to severely injure Ashes, the extraordinary witch? Hummingbird mooted. And the God's Punishment Army isn't nearly as powerful as Ashes. Is that true? Even the invincible Ashes has lost before? Soft Feathers, who rarely spoke, looked surprised. I won't consider it a loss. Carter was battered to be unconscious while Ashes was completely incapacitated. It's more like a tie. As far as I know, it wasn't a fair fight. Agatha disputed. Had the Extraordinary used equivalent weapons to Carter's, she would have been in a stronger position. But Sleeping Island only has one Extraordinary, while there are thousands of soldiers carrying guns. Hold it, sisters. Your debate's heading in the wrong direction. Scroll shook her head in disapproval. We're talking about the church and His Majesty now. Wendy quietly heaved a sigh of relief. Although everyone was anxious, nobody seemed afraid of fighting against the church. This would have been completely inconceivable a year ago, when the might of the church seemed to be as steady and unshakable as a huge mountain. None of the witches who fought against them was able to survive. The Witch Cooperation Association had to hide in various places, and only managed to shake off the chasing enemies by advancing towards the secluded impassable mountain range. Of course, this mentality change was, for the most part, down to the fact that His Majesty had never lost a foreign war. All in all, this war will be crucial to the future of the Witch Union. Wendy inhaled a deep breath. Has anyone thought about what will happen if His Majesty completely defeats the church? Everyone in the room turned silent, but a strange and indescribable twinkle gleamed in their eyes. The entire kingdom, and maybe even the entire continent, will become safe for witches to reside in. In His Majesty's territory, we'll be able to create a new world together with other people, one where everyone enjoys equal honor and status. This is also what His Majesty has mentioned several times. I just didn't think that it could all be possible so soon. Wendy paused for a short while. However, going by His Majesty's usual way of doing things, I urge everyone not to work too hard. Just do your jobs as usual. We'll not fail if we can keep this confidence. She did not comprehend sophisticated ideas, nor was she among the Union's most able and brightest witches. Now that His Majesty had placed her in charge of the Union, she simply did what she could. Every time before an expedition, His Majesty would give an impassioned speech to the First Army. Wendy could never think of a way to inspire the witches in the same way as him. In the end, she always resorted to speaking what she felt at the bottom of her heart. The intention to be considerate of other people is more important than anything else. She firmly remembered these words of Scroll. This place is our home and will serve as the turning point for the fates of all witches. I'll give all of myself for it. Wendy stretched out her left hand, with the back of her hand facing upwards. Scroll was the first to press her hand on top of Wendy's. Then, Nightingale and Anna followed. For His Majesty and City of Neverwinter. All of the witches gathered together with their hands stacked on top of each other's. The witches of the Bloodfang Association had hesitated for a while, as though they were unsure whether they would be accepted by everyone else, until Leaf pulled them into the circle. As per convention, they were only considered truly integrated into the group after they made hand contact with the other witches. I really don't wish to have to deal with this annoying bunch before fighting against the demons. Although Agatha voiced her displeasure, she also stretched out her hand and joined in. Lastly, Wendy placed her right hand on top of the stack and looked around at everyone. For the Witch Union. For the Eternal Holy Mountain. After the witches departed, only Wendy and Nightingale were left in the room. As Wendy was closing the door, she suddenly felt a breeze of cold wind behind her back. She turned her head back, only to see that Nightingale had silently opened the window, and was now sitting on the sill and looking into the night sky. The night breeze blew her hair upwards, while at the same time a faint fragrance whiffed by. Are you also worried about this war? Wendy walked over to the window and asked. Worried? Nightingale turned her head to face Wendy. Under the glow of the stone of light, scorching rays gleamed in her pupils. The only thing I'm worried about is that I'll laugh myself to death. I'll laugh? It was only at this time that Wendy felt the piercing aura that emanated from the latter's body. Unlike most witches, Nightingale could release her magic powers even when she was not actively using her abilities. To her, these powers were no longer elusive and intangible things, but instead were like sharp blades which created inaccessible regions of space. It was as if her misty world was slowly eating into the space around itself and beginning to take hold of the physical world. Ever since she came to Border Town, this feeling was becoming more and more pronounced to the people around her. To an enemy, this would be the greatest portent of danger. I've waited a long time to take proper revenge on the church, Nightingale slowly explained. Our sisters who wrongly died at the church's hands must also be looking forward to this day. The taste of revenge, from my experience, is truly unforgettable. It was hard to imagine that this was the same woman who lingered in bed and did not want to wake up in the morning. Fortunately, she wasn't an enemy of the sisters. Wendy reached her hand out to Nightingale. Upon contact, the piercing aura disappeared. She proceeded to cuddle Nightingale in her arms. You can continue to do whatever you want. Just remember to take good care of His Majesty, and also yourself. Is that understood? Yes. Nightingale closed her eyes and replied softly. I will. Chapter 582, Military Strategy. Once the war order was issued, Neverwinter immediately went into overdrive. Bags of wheat plundered from Fallen Dragon Ridge quickly filled up the previously empty granaries. A portion of these would be shelled and powdered into rations for the soldiers participating in the war. Other than food, there were also firearms and ammunition. The soldiers recruited during the months of demons had already completed their basic training, and the outstanding cadets were hastily incorporated into the ranks of the First Army and given new weapons and uniforms. Those who performed average were placed in the reserve force and assigned to one of Roland's cities, where they replaced the veterans stationed there. By doing so, Neverwinter's available military strength was rapidly increased to 5,000 men. In theory, this put them on par with the Judgment Army's numbers. However, due to limitations on transportation capacity, the further the battlefield was from Western region, the fewer the number of soldiers who could enter battle would be. Because Roland assessed that the tooth extraction campaign would not be too difficult, he eventually decided to send out 1,500 men, with Iron Axe serving as the commander. In this expedition, the advisor department was absorbed into the First Army, and the key members were made up of nobles, knights, and commoners from Longsong area. This included Sir Eltek, who was Morning Light's father, and Trevor, chief bodyguard of the Honeysuckle family. The criteria was that they had to have experience in artillery warfare, or had served in the Second Army. Although the people Roland selected were not professionals in this field, Roland trusted that they could learn on the job, and in any case, it was good to have a few more people to provide counsel to the commander. They did not possess any actual power to command. It was entirely up to Iron Axe whether to adopt their plans and advice. After considering that the First Army might encounter the Church's Pure Witch during the expedition, Roland decided that Eye of Magic Sylvie and Confinement Cage Iffy would be following them as well. The former could detect magic power and alert the army to the enemy's positions, while the latter could capture Pure Witch under the right circumstances. Sylvie would also bring along a sigil of listening so that she could contact Neverwinter at any time. As a result of these preparations, an army with modern military structures, firepower, and communication capabilities slowly began to take shape. The tooth extraction campaign was mainly targeted at Redwater City, Silver City, and Impassable Castle, the three cities which were closest in distance to Western Region. The preparation for the expedition required 4 days of time. Apart from choosing which of his reliable guards to send towards the Old Holy City, Roland spent the rest of the time discussing various details of the war together with the commander and the advisor department. One such detail, which Roland found difficult to resolve, was the location where they would intercept the enemy. Everyone had their own views on this issue, and nobody could convince anyone else that they were right. The commander of the gun battalion, Brian, was adamant that the army should intercept the enemy within Western Region. His reasoning was very substantial. The battle has to be carried out in Western Region for the First Army to fully utilize its advantage in firepower. With our paddle steamers providing logistical support, we'll be able to replenish ammunition and manpower in less than a day. No matter how long the battle drags on, we can be assured of victory. This distance from their base will also be extremely disadvantageous to the Church. If they cannot break through within a month, they won't even have any food left. Conversely, Edith was the main advocate of fighting outside the Western Region. Do you really think that they'll have no food? Do you know how many Church believers there are in the Kingdom of Greycastle? Even if all of the churches are burned to the ground, the Pope simply has to issue an order and these people will bring all the food they have to the Judgment Army. Mid-July is also the ripening season of wheat. As long as the enemy occupies 1 or 2 cities, they'll surely have a continuous supply of food. And this is not the scariest thing. Don't we already know that the Church possesses pills of madness which can turn ordinary people into enchanted monsters? If the war situation turns bad for them, they may willfully force the commoners in these places to consume these pills, and manipulate them to fight against our army so as to wear us down. What will we do then? You don't understand anything about gunpowder weapons. Danner was on Brian's side regarding this issue. Transporting cannons and ammunition is very costly and difficult. They aren't like swords, which can be used many times. A single battle will require many ships to replenish the supplies that are expended. If we do as you say and intercept the enemy before they enter our kingdom, what will we do when we run out of ammunition? I admit that I don't understand gunpowder weapons, nor the specific methods which your army uses to fight. What I do know is that the objective is the most important thing in a battle. If we cannot achieve our intended objective, even victory will be a failure. Edith remained unrelenting. His Majesty needs every one of his citizens. How can you allow the Church to enter our kingdom and wantonly destroy the populace? If we cannot win the battle, everything else is meaningless. What we have to do is to solve those problems that seem unsolvable. The only 2 people present who could provide a final verdict were Roland and Iron Axe. However, whenever Roland was around, Iron Axe would never speak more than he needed to. No matter what order Roland issued, he would agree and execute it unconditionally. As both viewpoints in this argument had their pros and cons, Roland was not able to make a decision immediately. The most effective way of using gunpowder weapons in battle was to set up a crossfire net and wait for the enemy to enter it. The western region was undoubtedly the ideal location for something like this. However, if the church indeed used his citizens as a vanguard for their army, his losses would be huge. While the army's weapons could easily subdue the enchanted people, the population loss would be hard to make up for in the short term. It was only on the day before the army set out that Sir Eltec made a suggestion which brought an end to this dispute. "Why don't we place our troops and supplies in the border cities in advance?" he suggested while stroking his beard. "This way, we can substantially shorten the transport distances." Brian shook his head in disapproval without giving the idea a second thought. "That's only possible if we can know beforehand where the church will be attacking from. Sir, the northern region doesn't have enough riverways. If we gather our troops in the wrong positions, we may even be unable to catch up with the enemy's movement," Carter added. "Furthermore, the border between Kingdom of Grey Castle and Kingdom of Dawn is very long. We won't be able to keep watch on every passageway. It's true that we don't know where the enemy will attack from, but we can induce them to attack from a particular point." Everyone was stumped when they heard this suggestion. After a long while, Brian frowned and remarked, "I'm afraid that only the Pope can do something like this." Meanwhile, Edith revealed a thoughtful expression on her face. Sir Eltec was unperturbed by the sarcastic response he received. He candidly replied, "The truth is, I got the idea from Miss Edith. If we can estimate the time of the church's invasion based on the transportation of food supplies, then the church would also be able to detect the approaching of war based on changes in our border cities." "Coldwind Ridge," Edith suddenly exclaimed. "Indeed." The old knight laughed. "If we amass supplies in Coldwind Ridge and station the First Army in the nearby Deep Valley town, we can be confident of directing the enemy to attack from a certain route, agree?" "How so?" Brian remained puzzled. "Because Coldwind Ridge is too near to the Holy City," Edith explained. "Rather than wait for the church to attack, it's better for us to assume an offensive stance and compel them to concentrate their forces in this area." "I see." Roland was quick to understand what was going on. Deep Valley Town was the only town connected to the central network of rivers. Although it was far away, his fleet of paddle steamers would be able to ship large quantities of supplies over there within 1 or 2 months, while the last leg of the transportation journey, which had to be done by land, could be reduced to only 3 days. Although a number of supplies might not be completely sufficient, it would at least be able to maintain a large-scale battle for some time. Of course, a better way would be to set up a defense line below Coldwind Ridge and wait for the enemy to enter the position that was made up of bunkers, barbed wires, and trenches. "What if they insist on not going this way?" Banner inquired. "Then the holy city of Hermes will be completely flattened," Roland answered. Chapter 583, Anna's Secret. When Anna opened her eyes, she saw that all around her was a fiery red. Scorching hot air blew directly at her face and scalded her skin. Blazing flames. The blazing flames were everywhere. Smoke billowed from the lower part of the shed and caused her to choke. She heard cries from the back room, but was unsure if it was just a hallucination. As wood came into contact with the flames, they let out a crackling sound. Every now and then, she would notice sparks and splinters fall from overhead. She got off her haystack and tried to make her way towards the back room, but was quickly repelled by incoming heat waves. Eventually, she scrambled her way out of the shed, and watched helplessly as her house was engulfed by the raging flames. Her neighbors started to crowd around as well. Some tried to help put out the fire. However, the nearest water source was Redwater River, which was located outside the town. The few pots of water which they did their best to fetch had no effect on the fire at all. After Anna rushed back and forth several times, she suddenly saw the figure of her father. He had hurried back from the mines. He was still wearing his soiled coat and his face was covered with dark gray dust. He stood beside the house, which had been reduced to its wooden frames, and stared blankly at it. As though she saw her tower of strength, Anna could no longer suppress the fear and panic in her heart, and tears began to roll down her face like pearls. She cried and screamed as she ran towards her father and held on to him tightly. However, her father did not comfort her as she hoped. "Where's your mother?" He grabbed her by the shoulder so violently that it caused her to squeal in pain. "And your brother?" Anna shook her head, but did not expect that what followed would be a slap on the face. "Did you actually escape alone? Why didn't you rescue them? Damn, how can you only care about yourself?" Anna suddenly sat bolt upright in her bed, panting heavily. The scolding voice continued to reverberate beside her ears and refused to go away. This dream again. She picked up a cup from the bedside table and gulped down the cold water. It took her quite a long time to recover fully. On the first day of every month, Anna would dream of this scene. It was as if there was someone in her brain who had to constantly remind her of the past. She turned her head and examined the calendar on her desk. Today happened to be the last day of the first week of summer, and also the day of the month that the Witch Union distributed the salaries. She washed herself simply and put on her clothes. Then she walked out of the castle and headed towards the witch building in the backyard. "Sister Anna." Ring grinned upon the sight of her. "You've come so early." "Good morning." Wendy greeted and laughed softly. "The weather today seems good. Will you still be going to the North Slope Mountain later?" "Lady Anna." Her two former classmates hurriedly bowed in respect. "Call me Anna, just like the old times." She waved her hands, took a seat at one side of a long table, and pondered for a moment before answering. "I have some other things to do first. I'll only be going in the afternoon." "Oh? That's rare." Wendy revealed a spirited expression. "Could it be that you and His Majesty Roland are they going shopping?" Ring shouted excitedly. Pearl and Grey Rabbit, who were listening on one side, laughed uncontrollably. Anna shook her head in denial but did not say anything further. Neither did Wendy continue to ask. She took out an envelope from a drawer and placed it in Anna's hands. "This is the month's salary. 2 gold royals." "Thank you." Witches did not have to prepare what they ate or wore, nor did they have to pay for rent or transport. They would even be given free prototypes of the luxury goods sold in the convenience market, and could request for more or newer items easily. Therefore, most witches felt that their salaries were not of much use, and did not understand why His Majesty insisted on paying them. Only Anna was able to guess why Roland did so. Furthermore, this measure inadvertently did her a favor. She walked back to the castle hall while holding on to her salary envelope. When she reached, she saw that the chief knight, Carter Lannis, was already waiting there. "Miss Anna." Carter stood up and greeted her. "Shall we proceed as usual?" "Yes." She took a gold royal out of the envelope and handed it to the knight. "Let's go." During the reconstruction of Border Town, the natives were each given a new lodging. Anna's father was no exception. After he sold Anna for a price of 25 gold royals to the church, she never had any contact with him again. From that moment, she no longer considered him her father. However, there were some things which Anna could not completely walk away from. For example, the gold royal which she let Carter pass to her father as the cost of living. Like most poor people who suddenly received a windfall, her father did not hold on to the sale money for too long. Within half a year, he became penniless by gambling, as well as being a victim of fraud and theft. At that time Anna was not yet well known, but her talent was spotted by natives when she used her fire abilities to mend the gaps in the city walls. Her father tried to depute a neighbor to visit Anna, but was invariably rejected and ridiculed. When Carter, who was then in charge of organizing the militia, heard about this matter, he disclosed it to Anna. From then on, she knew that she had to do something in order to keep her father quiet. She did not wish to see him cause trouble to Roland. She walked with Carter to a quiet neighborhood in the east of the city and went up to the second floor of a building. Carter turned his head back to face her. "Miss Anna, wait for me here." "Sorry to trouble you." "No, it's nothing much." He walked up to a door and knocked forcefully on it. After a while, the door creaked open. "Ah, it's you, knight sir, Why did you take so long to open the door, are you deaf?" Carter yelled. "Move aside and don't stand in the doorway." Yes. Perhaps this is the way things should be." Anna leaned against a wall along the corridor and heaved a sigh of relief. In all honesty, she did not want to care about her once father at all, but she knew that matters would only get worse if she completely disregarded him. Furthermore, she could not approach him by herself, or else, this bigoted and conceited man would act as though he was still her father, and the deterrence effect would be lost. Rather than pleading him not to do anything, it was better to let him know that there was now a world of difference in their societal status. As the renowned chief knight, Carter was considered to be a great noble among the commoners of the border area. By having him deliver the gold royal as hush money together with a few sentences of harsh warnings, it should be sufficient to keep the old man quiet, and thus ensure that there would be no trouble for Roland. Anna did not understand this kind of relationship in the past. After she was captured and imprisoned, she lost interest in everything and her world turned completely dead gray. It was only when Roland rescued her that her world became colorful again. After living in the castle for a period of time, she gradually understood the complex relationships between people, and also the reasons why her father was angry at her. But she abhorred these kinds of convoluted things. She could only be truly relaxed when she was with Roland. Or when she was reading the books which recorded intriguing knowledge, although they appeared complicated and incomprehensible at first. After prolonged reading, one would discover that the relationships between different things were simple and direct, and would not change because of new interests or desires. She wondered why the real world did not turn out to be as clean and tidy as the formulas which explained its workings. The door opened again. After a brief moment of flattering voices urging him to stay, Carter returned to her side and said, "Miss Anna, it's done." "Okay." Anna could breathe a lot easier now that the matter was settled. "Don't tell His Majesty." "Of course. I understand." She nodded in approval and turned to walk downstairs. Although she could never get rid of these terrible feelings, she knew that with Roland, the pleasant things in life would only keep increasing. She could not wait to proceed to the North Slope Mountain to continue her research work. That was a place she was actually fond of. Chapter 584, The Estuary. After nearly 4 months, Lotus had a different feeling when she returned to Border Town. The town had developed rapidly, and even the heavy snow did not stop its expansion. She had this particular feeling every time she was on the Redwater Bridge. The factories located on the south bank of the river were arrayed like a neat square, and the dock area across the river had expanded more than several times. Concrete boats with black smoke moving back and forth on the river almost covered the glittering surface of the river. It's much more crowded than Sleeping Island. There are a lot of people, and they look like ants down there. Honey leaned against the railings of the bridge looking down. "I agree," said Lotus. She had not understood why His Highness had wanted such a broad bridge and felt that it had been a waste of materials when the bridge was being constructed. Now, however, she thought that his decision was proven to be right. Occasionally, people moving across the river via the bridge would glance up at them, curious about their odd dress and appearance. In other cities, Lotus would think about how to escape at moments like this, but she did not need to worry about her safety here. In addition to the changes one could see, there were still many more improvements in life, naked to the eye. For example, the heating system that made people feel warm, the electric lamps that lit up the night and new, delicious food like ice cream and so on. Evelyn and Candle could talk about those changes in their life with her for a whole day, but those were not what surprised Lotus the most. She thought the biggest change was the relation between witches and ordinary people. And this could be seen in Evelyn's tavern. The tavern was funded by the Witch Union. Evelyn was the manager and bartender, serving guests who visited the western region delicious blended wines. It was His Majesty's idea that they should spend some of their savings on business instead of keeping it hidden inside their drawers. Lotus had been invited by Wendy to have 2 glasses of iced apple fruit wine. The taste was exquisite, much more aromatic than oat wine and mixed with a delicate fruit flavor. The drinks also looked quite attractive, and you could see the clear pale green liquid through the transparent crystal glass. The environment there was not like that of the ordinary pubs, which were often noisy and chaotic. Instead, the guests were sitting elegantly in their own seats, and the floor, tables, and drinking vessels were all clean and tidy. She would not consider the place a pub if it were not for the row of barrels behind the counter. Of course, the experience corresponded with the high prices of the drinks. Evelyn stood in front of the counter, having conversations with her guests, and nobody reproached her because she was a witch. Instead, many foreign businessmen came over to drink due to curiosity. Lotus had seldom seen Evelyn smile so happily, and she knew Evelyn really liked the job. Lotus recalled that most of the activities of witches had been basically within the castle area before she had left, and the witches had often been protected by His Majesty's bodyguards when they needed to go out. But now they were gradually being assimilated into every part of the town. It was incredible that such changes could be made within just one season. Talking with Wendy that evening gave Lotus a deeper understanding. She believed perhaps that was the reason why the witches of the Witch Union were willing to do their best. They were not only building Neverwinter for His Majesty Roland, but also building their home. Let's go. Today we'll complete the transformation of the estuary if everything goes smoothly, Lotus said to Honey. Yay! When the last piece of rock sank into the ground, Lotus wiped the sweat off her forehead and took a deep breath. Awesome, you really made a road through the mountain. Honey applauded. Meanwhile, the row of birds crouched in the treetop above her head tweeted. Of course, there's nothing I can't do, said Lotus proudly. Unlike the reefs surrounding Sleeping Island, the rock layer here was much deeper and harder, so it was much more difficult to transform it. Fortunately, she did not need to transform the entire mountain into flat ground. According to His Majesty's plan, she just needed to build a passageway that could allow 5 or 6 carriages to pass side by side. Thinking of the iron bridge, this time she did not consider such a spacious road a waste. Since the hills were more than 40 meters above sea level, the easiest way to build the road was by sinking the ground gradually until it turned into a long, gentle slope. In order to facilitate the passage of carriages, she purposely pressed the rock layer on the surface of the hills into a level road surface. By doing so, even if it rained, puddles of water would not form on the surface of the road. Now, if you were standing on top of the slope, you could see the golden shallow beach and the blue sea, and you could feel the cool sea breeze blowing along the slope with a familiar salty smell. Did you bring fire? Honey bounded toward her. No, what do you want to do? Roast fish, of course. Honey smiled and added, how about you drive them out to the top of the water surface when I attract them here? We can just put them under the sun for 2 days if we don't have fire. The birds above her head tweeted even more merrily. Lotus rolled her eyes and said, I don't want to smell salted fish everywhere. Besides, haven't you got bored of it? You ate so many on Sleeping Island. I feel it was quite good, Honey said while tilting her head. Anyway, putting fish under the sun is forbidden here. His Majesty doesn't like the smell of fish either. Lotus suddenly remembered Ashes and was not sure whether she was still plagued from eating fish soup on Sleeping Island. His Majesty said he plans to build a harbor, so Lady Tilly can come here anytime she wants, and she won't need to come by hot air balloon anymore. When Lady Tilly was mentioned, this attracted Honey's attention. So, will she come? Her expression was even simpler than that of an animal. Lotus patted her fluffy hair, saying, I have no idea, but soon His Majesty has to fight against the church, so she must come to help her brother. Actually, Lotus was not sure, especially after she had heard all the details of the Bloodfang Association and Heidi Morgan. In the past, she had not liked the pompous attitude of the combat witches, but now it seemed that they were also quite pitiable. After she stopped holding prejudice against them, she realized that they were actually not that different from herself. At least now, she could have a short conversation with Iffy once in a while. The combat witches on the island, however, would not be persuaded by Tilly easily. Yay, that's great. Lotus sighed inwardly. This little girl knew nothing about war. If Lady Tilly failed to solve the Bloodfang Association's problem, and the church attacked His Majesty Roland at the same time, it would mean big trouble. Despite that, she still wished that Lady Tilly could come to Border Town again. And she also wished Lady Tilly could stay here forever. Then the wish she had made in the winter would come true. Thus, all the witches including myself could live happily in Border Town, Lotus thought. Chapter 585, The Day of Embarkment. 3 days later, 1,500 soldiers of the Tooth Extraction Campaign boarded their ships and headed for their first destination, Redwater City. At the same time, according to strategic planning, the other soldiers of the First Army would escort the ammunition and food to the northern region. They would follow the inland water path, pass through Redwater River, the King City River, San Juan River, and reach Deep Valley Town in the end. In order to cope with such a large-scale deployment, Roland gathered all the paddle steamers in City of Neverwinter and also rented 30 sailing ships from Margary's Chamber of Commerce to deliver war materials. By doing so, he could send 3,000 soldiers and artillery ammunition to the northern region within a month, which was even before July. In the modern world, transporting a few thousands of people could be completed by just 3 or 4 ferries in one trip. But in this era, this was an incredible initiative. The vanguards would also move towards the northern region after they had accumulated enough God stones of retaliation during the Tooth Extraction Campaign, and finally 4,500 soldiers would gather at Deep Valley Town and force the church to have a war with them at Coldwind Ridge. Of course, there was always a plan B, in case the church responded too quickly, sending a troop of God's punishment army to move southward across the impassable mountain range and launched a surprise attack at City of Neverwinter, or that they abandoned Holy City and tried to enter the kingdom from the border between Kingdom of Dawn and Kingdom of Grey Castle. The 500 men defending City of Neverwinter were prepared for the first situation. Defenders always got a certain advantage, especially with the 152mm stronghold cannon. As for the second situation, it would result in a lose-lose situation. Under such circumstances, the First Army would resort to a war of attrition and Kingdom of Grey Castle would lose lots of people. Meanwhile, the Church would lose Holy City of Hermes and their faith and status would also suffer. Fortunately, it was almost impossible for the second case to happen. The population of Kingdom of Grey Castle would increase after the war, but the Church could not afford to lose Holy City, their foundation. As long as the Pope was not frantic, they would never abandon their Holy City. The Pearl of the Northern Region, Edith Conte, followed the first fleet to leave, too. Please don't worry, Your Majesty, I'll write a letter to inform my father to send half of his grains to the soldiers, and the Lord of Deep Valley Town will also try his best to fulfill any request from the First Army. Aren't you going back to the Northern Region? Asked Roland. I'd like to follow the First Army and to participate in all the coming battles instead of going back home, said Edith, who stood on the side of the ship. She raised her hair and bowed, saying, Please take care of my brother for me. I'll take care of him. Thank you, Your Majesty, I'll wait for you in Deep Valley Town, for the real Great War. After the ship left, Nightingale complained. Tut-tut, the war is a life and death matter, but she talks about it as if she's going to a date. Does she? Don't you realize it? The action of raising her hair. There's no wind blowing. Why did she take the trouble to do it? Nightingale snorted and added, Of course, it may be her habit to seduce men with such a gesture and it's already a habit. Are you still upset by the letter? Roland shook his head and did not know whether to laugh or cry. I've told you, it's impossible. By the way, did she lie? Nightingale reluctantly replied, Basically, no. At least when she expressed allegiance and talked about those combat arrangements, she said the truth. That's enough. Let's go back to the castle. Roland took a breath and said. City of Neverwinter was under pressure due to the coming war, but there was good news too. The projects that had been planned during months of demons were completed one by one, and the basic infrastructure was greatly enhanced. The most important finished project was the Western region's own estuary. After the estuary was completed, Roland informed the Ministry of Construction immediately. Soon some houses, warehouses, and temporary docks were built on Deepwater Port. With a natural deepwater harbor, larger ships could now be built, but as Anna had already focused on producing military equipment, the shipbuilding plan would be postponed until the end of the war. The supporting hub project, the construction of Highway 67, had also started. That road would begin from the bank of the Redwater River Bridge and connect the industrial area with the south of Shallow Beach. Its construction team was the same as that of the Kingdom Main Street project. Roland also fulfilled his promise to make nearly half of the workers that performed outstandingly qualify as residents of City of Neverwinter and issued identity cards to them. Besides, the first coke oven in North Slope Mountain was also put into production mode during this period of time. To be precise, it could have started earlier, but it had had many setbacks during the test run. For example, at the first time of trial, the furnace had not been vented and the air used for dry distillation burnt directly. At another time, the temperature and timing had not been well controlled, resulted in coking failure. There had even been a serious accident, when the exhaust pipe had been clogged with dust and the flame had got out of the furnace. Fortunately, as Summer had the ability to play back what had happened before, the problems of the process were quickly identified and fixed. A new batch of improved coke ovens was in full swing construction. Besides basic infrastructure, military production also stepped up. The howitzer, an important new weapon designed for the war, was finally a success. Despite the limited size of its shells and the limited speed of reloading, it was still a fatal weapon in the radius of 10 meters. Combined with debris, it could affect an even bigger area, twice or 3 times as large as the original coverage. Several 152mm artillery could hit targets nearly 10 kilometers away, which meant that they were able to strike the rear of the enemy directly, and now the shock waves and debris of the howitzer could destroy the defenseless enemy there completely. This kind of war was completely beyond the imagination of the people in this era. Unfortunately, a heavy howitzer could only be delivered with the assistance of hummingbirds, and when there was no hard-surface concrete road, only 2 howitzers could be used on the battlefield. Even so, Roland was not willing to give up such a powerful firepower. In contrast, the news about the successful operation of the steam turbine was not so important. After all, whether it was a new type of steam-powered boat or thermal power generation, there was not enough manpower for research and development. In a sense, after receiving the message from Kingdom of Dawn, City of Neverwinter had entered the wartime system, and all of the resources had to divert to give way to the preparation for war, Anna being no exception. In the morning, she processed artillery shells and fuses, and in the afternoon, she cut key parts used in heavy machine guns. Those were what she had to do every day. The arsenal operated on 3 shifts for the production of bullets and revolving rifles. Thanks to Mystery Moon and Candle, all kinds of machine tools ran at maximum capacity in production without a big problem. Shortly after returning to the office, Roland received a letter carried by the carrier pigeon from Fjords. "This is the reply from Tilly?" Roland quickly opened the letter and soon finished reading the contents. Pondering for a moment, he asked Nightingale to get Maggie. "Bring Soraya to catch the leaving fleet. Let Iffy do what's suggested in the letter." Coup. Chapter 586, The Battle of Redwater City. After 2 days of sailing, blocks of villages and farmland began to appear on the desolate green field, and the city wall of Redwater City gradually came into sight. As the biggest city in Redwater River, its population and resources could compare favorably with the old King's City. If it was not for the advantage brought by the minerals in Silver City, ancestors in the Wimbledon family would have made Redwater City the King's City instead of the current City of Dawn. Brian observed through a telescope for a while and asked, "What will we do when we arrive at the wharf? How about shocking them first with the naval artillery? It may provoke their lord's hostility." Ironax shook his head. "Our main target is the church. Other things can be put aside. According to diplomatic process, we present the documents first." When the fleet arrived at the suburban wharf, great turmoil began at once. The gate closed quickly, and the drawbridge of the moat was pulled up while the soldiers concentrated in line outside the wharf. Brian sent out the documents and received a prompt reply. He said His Majesty's army is welcomed by the Lord, but we are required to send an envoy into the city to explain the conditions. He will not open the gate and let us enter until he verifies the cause of the matter, the soldier reported. What conditions? We've already explained very clearly in the documents, Brian said crossly, we are only against the church. Does he want to help those church scoundrels escape? Is this also your rule? Iron Axe turned back and looked at the accompanying members in the advisor group. Yes, it should be if they're nobles, Petrov's chief bodyguard Trevor answered, and it's normal for them to be skeptical. After all, His Majesty, Roland himself hasn't come and Redwater City is not in his jurisdiction. We only need to send an envoy with suitable status to explain clearly. Suitable status? Someone from a large family who can earn the Lord's trust, Trevor explained further, like the Honeysuckle family in the western region. Iron Axe, Brian, and Vanner looked at each other with embarrassment. Before they'd become the commanders of the First Army, one was of the Sand Nation, the other two were civilians. They didn't know how to properly converse with the nobles, nor did they have a suitable status which could help them to talk to the Castellan equally. Why not blast the gate directly with cannons? Brian got angry and said, once they feel our attack they'll know what the right way is. Allow me, Edith said, the Cobb family is an aristocratic family in the north and my father is also a duke. I'm qualified. What if it's a trick? Vanner hesitated and said, if the Lord of Redwater City colluded with the church long ago, they might arrest you when you enter and force us to withdraw. It's not good for him and you won't compromise, will you? Edith smiled and said, as long as he is in his right mind, he won't plan such a move on the envoys or he would arouse other nobles' antipathy. And it can't affect the overall situation. On the contrary, if he had colluded with the church, the city would have been blocked in the state of battle. There hasn't been any hot oil or bonfire set up in the top of the city yet. I'll go with her, Sir Eltek said, I was once a knight and I can take care of her if there's a danger. I appreciate your concern, but the Pearl of the Northern region doesn't need any care, Edith said with confidence. Bring a team of soldiers with you. Iron Axe made the final decision. If we hear a shot, we'll start an attack. An hour later, the gate was opened slowly, and the drawbridge was lowered. They were stunned when Miss Edith and a chubby middle-aged man came out under the escort of a small group from the First Army and a group from the Silver Armored Knights. The man was well-dressed but courted Edith like a henchman from his obvious expression and behavior. This is the Lord of Redwater City, Earl Delta, Edith introduced the Lord to them and added, I also asked him to send the patrol to surround the church in case the priest and believers escape. Then she shifted her head and said, these are the commanders of His Highness's First Army, Lord Iron Axe, Mr. Brian and Mr. Vanner. Iron Axe, and what? The Earl was stunned for a while to hear such kind of introduction for the first time. Never mind. She laughed. This is His Highness's terminology. Ahem, I see. Delta cleared his throat and said, I have heard that Prince Roland, no, His Majesty acts in a different style, really not common. So, welcome to Redwater City. Excuse me, His Majesty indeed just wants to wipe out the insurgents of the church. This was the Lord of the Redwater City? Brian wondered in amazement. He was quite different from what Brian had imagined. Yes, Iron Axe answered in earnest, nodding, I think it's clear in the documents of His Majesty that the church is trying to occupy the Four Kingdoms and their rebellion has become a fact. You should have heard the calamity that happened in the kingdoms of Everwinter and Wolfheart. We'll leave once we clear out the church's people. Well, it is not necessary to be in such hurry, Delta rubbed his hands and said, and tonight I'll hold a grand feast in the castle. I hope all of you can attend. Although he was inviting everyone, his eyes focused on the Pearl of the Northern region. Brian was going to refuse but Edith accepted without hesitation. Thank you for your invitation. It will be an honor but we have to complete His Majesty's task first. Sure. The Earl smiled with slanted eyes. The First Army entered the city in order under the guidance of the knights. Avoiding the Earl's attention, Brian walked close to Edith and chided her in a low voice. Why did you accept his invitation? He definitely has other, indecent intentions. This is the normal communication between the nobles. It would be too rude if we refused, she replied in a dismissive tone. I don't know why His Majesty excludes the nobility from his army, but you represent His Majesty, Roland, so you can't refuse these things entirely. And it'll be much easier to recover Redwater City on the basis of a good relationship with him. As for his indecent intention, she twitched her mouth. Is there any other facial expression a male noble can show? Brian swallowed with difficulty and sighed after a moment. So, you're used to this kind of life? It's not bad, just a tad boring, Edith said with a little satire. Well, haven't you ever admired the life of a noble? He opened his mouth but could find no words. Suddenly, there was turmoil up ahead. It seemed that someone was shouting, and they could hear something fall to the ground. What happened? The Earl called out. Iron Axe clenched his right hand into a fist and shouted, All soldiers, stand by. On the alert. The troops stopped marching immediately. The soldiers took their rifles from their backsides expertly and changed quickly from columns to rows. At this moment, Sylvie warned from the middle of the team with a loud voice. Watch out. There's magic reaction in front. Chapter 587, A Nameless Victim. Magic reaction? Earl Delta turned around and asked, What's that? Tell your knights to step aside now. Brian had no time to think about etiquette and shouted at him. He had barely finished speaking when a group of believers, in indigo robes, popped out from around the corner and rushed into the guiding knights. The force was so great that the horses were immediately knocked over and several knights found themselves pinned under their heavy mounts before they even realized what had happened. The other knights immediately drew their swords and began to fight with the believers. The people on the street panicked and ran, causing many to fall and get trampled by the fleeing crowd. The sounds of people crying for help could be heard everywhere and the sight was a complete mess. Treason. The Earl was shocked, at first, and then he became furious. Damn it. Kill all the rebels. But, a piece of flying slate shut him up. It had been part of the pavement and more pieces of slate rose up in the air and swiftly headed toward a knight. It happened so fast that all anyone could see was a fleeting green shadow. The first person who was hit quickly started to bleed profusely from his joints and eyes. His armor immediately crumbled and it would have been impossible for him to survive. After that, more pieces of slate flew around, even taking out some of the believers. The vertical pieces of slate were shattering people's bones, while the horizontal slates were cutting them in half. Before Earl Delta could even feel shocked, Brian quickly pulled him aside. Fire! Iron Axe ordered. Gunshots continuously rang out across the street. The people who were still standing erect got mowed down like a wheat crop, and once the gunpowder plume dissipated there was a littering of wounded knights and believers across the battlefield. For a short time, the field had been pure chaos. Now there were bodies scattered everywhere. Some of them were still gasping feebly while others moaned in pain, continuing to writhe on the ground. Where are the enemies? Brian stared at the street corner without so much as blinking, as if he were facing a formidable enemy. Enemies? They all fell, didn't they? The Earl asked, bewildered, apparently in shock. He obviously had not expected that His Majesty's troops would be so strong. A dozen silver-armored knights and unstoppable believers became disabled in almost the blink of an eye. It's coming, Sylvie said in a hoarse voice. As if responding to her warning, a woman appeared from around the corner. She was rolling up the street slates like giant carpet wheels and making them float in the air one by one. Heavy gunshots rang out again. Most of the slate was torn apart immediately while one piece of slate spun and swept along the crowd like a thick, unmanned sword. Oh, no. Brian's heart sank. From the way it appears, a flintlock isn't going to break down the rotating slate quickly enough. He didn't want to imagine what was going to happen when the soldiers were hit. They were not wearing armor like the knights and the casualties were going to be significantly higher. And, yet, they had no choice but to continue fighting. Just after Brian had this realization, a purple light suddenly appeared in front of the troops. It was a cage made of magic power and it enveloped the incoming slate, shrinking rapidly, stopping the rotating rock abruptly. Is this an enemy, or a witch? Earl Delta stood in a daze. It wasn't until all of the floating slate had finally fallen did the first army cease fire. The cloud of heavy smoke from the gunpowder blurred their eyesight. The smell of sulfur pervaded the air, but no one dared to rub their eyes or even cough. Except for the sound of guns loading, the field was completely silent, for the moment. Was it Miss Sylvie? Iron Axe asked. The magic power. It disappeared, she said slowly. This meant that either the enemies had fled the battlefield or they had perished during the fight. After the smoke dissipated, Brian could see what had happened. A woman was laying on the pavement in a pool of blood, her thick, curly, dark green hair mixing with the sanguine fluid. Brian loosened his grip on the terrified Earl's shoulder and walked towards the woman, her red and white priestess cloth revealing her identity. There were 2 palm-sized wounds penetrating the stomach and abdomen of the pure witch, from which dark streams of blood drained. Apparently, the bullet still had force after penetrating the slate and had torn straight through her body. The multiple slices on her arms and legs must have been caused by the ricocheting stones. Even though her enemies had the god stone of retaliation, she was still able to roll up the slates and use them as shields. This way she could attack the enemies with the remaining slates and keep her enemies at a distance. However, she had not expected the flintlocks to be that powerful. Looking back now, she might have been shot during the first round of gunshots, but she was still able to manipulate the slate. Her willpower had been remarkable. Is she really a witch from the church? Delta moved closer, cautiously. Wasn't His Majesty clear in the pamphlet that was distributed in King City? Brian replied with annoyance. The church not only poisoned the common people with the berserk pills, but they also train witches to serve them in secret. Only the innocent girls that were framed by the church stand on our side. Have you not heard any of this before? Actually, I had heard this before, but it seemed unbelievable. This is just a small portion of the despicable acts committed by the church, and the nobles weren't much better, Brian thought to himself, but he didn't say a word. Edith was also shocked by this brief conflict. This was her first time seeing the combat abilities of the flintlock troops. The whole process looked like a storm and all the soldiers needed to do was stand still. In this regard, His Majesty's troops were physically at an advantage. One could imagine that the larger the scale of warfare, the more obvious the gun's advantage would be. There was no doubt that the traditional combat forms, where soldiers fought with thick armors and sharp weapons, had now shifted to a newer model. Moreover, with those machines roaring day and night, they could keep producing these weapons in the western region. This made it easy to imagine how great a war potential His Majesty had in his domain. It wasn't until Iron Axe had ordered the troops to keep moving, that Edith was able to recover herself. However, her belief was firmer that her choice was the right one. The First Army took a turn at the street corner and soon came to the church's front door. There were several bodies lying on the ground, and judging from their clothing, most of them belonged to the patrol team. They soon realized what had transpired. Just as the patrol ordered the blockade of the church, more than 200 enchanted people were suddenly killed and the lords were swept away. Some of the believers stayed to wrestle with the patrol team, while others created chaos in the outer city, where some people were attempting to break through the gate. Fortunately, the First Army was less than 300 feet from the church and they were able to confront the pure witch. If they had been even 15 minutes later, the pure witch would have likely escaped during the chaos. Brian immediately led a team into the church, where they eliminated the remaining resistors. Next was ransacking the place to find any documents, letters, or usable goods. According to His Majesty, taking anything of value was a requirement. Then, under Sylvie's guidance, the soldiers used small packets of explosives to blow up the iron gate blocking the basement. The people that were present all strained their eyes to see what lay behind the slowly falling gate. In nice orderly rows, there were over 10 boxes of the god stone of retaliation, and surrounding it were tidy stacks of gold. Chapter 588, A Night and You. At night, the halls of Redwater City Castle were glowing with light. Servants carrying wine glasses were walking through the crowd. Musicians were singing softly while plucking on the strings of their instruments. Enticing dishes were set on the table one by one, and goblets filled with red wine shone brightly. The noblemen and women split into groups of 2 or 3 and chatted happily with wine in their hands. Edith was the focus of people's eyes. She was moving around in the hall with Earl Delta and very much seemed to enjoy such a social event. Brian, however, felt totally alienated from the whole crowd. He felt the collar of his bottoming shirt choking him and his slim-fit coat restricting the movement of his arms, not to mention the extremely uncomfortable pointy-toe high-heel boots on his feet. He could not really understand how come the nobles could dart around on the very slippery floor wearing those shoes. Brian could not help but envy Vanner, who did not have to suffer from this as the guard of the 1st Army's battalion. But he immediately stood taller when he thought that Edith had reminded them that they were here to represent His Majesty Roland. Someone suddenly patted his shoulder, saying, "You look quite tense. Is this the first time you've come to attend a banquet like this?" He turned around and found that it was Sir Eltec, who dressed in broad-shoulder formal attire with a white scarf around his neck, looking completely different from his everyday look. "Relax, you don't have to be so nervous." "I'm not. It's not a bad thing. No one is good at everything." "It's not a big deal," Sir Eltec threw up his hands and said. After a moment of silence, Brian asked, "Where is Lord Iron Axe?" "He's escorting the witches, Miss Iffy and Miss Sylvie. They seem as popular as Miss Edith." Eltec pointed to the other side of the hall and said. Brian looked at that direction and saw the witches. They also looked very stiff in the dresses that Edith found for them in the last-minute rush. However, they were still attractive and seemed to be even more beautiful than the Pearl of Northern Region. "Those people have no idea who they are, and Lord Iron Axe is actually not protecting the witches," Brian said. "Oh, is it?" Sir Eltec shook his beard a little. Brian nodded and explained. "To be more accurate, he's protecting the nobles. If Miss Iffy is irritated, they'll suffer." They then looked at each other and giggled simultaneously. "Look, now you're relaxed and natural." Brian froze for a while and said, "Thank you." You're welcome," Sir Eltec said, and then he beckoned a servant. He picked up a glass of wine and turned to Brian, asking, "Would you like a drink?" "No. His Majesty has said that a military man on duty should never drink wine." "No wine, even when he's resting?" "It's a rule." "All right." Sir Eltec sipped the wine alone and added, "What a pity." "You think," Brian hesitated and continued. "What Miss Edith has said is true." "Such as?" "A knight should never refuse invitations to such occasions at his will, because he represents His Majesty." That's true." Sir Eltec nodded and said. Brian felt dejected, suddenly saying, "I'm not qualified to be a knight. I can't behave in such a natural, relaxed manner like her on these kind of occasions." "It's okay," Sir Eltec said while spreading his hands. "Some people are just naturally good at it and some are not. Indeed, a knight who stands out at a banquet can bring his lord glory, praises and even diplomatic advantages, but that's not all about being a knight. Actually, my son is also bad at social events for the nobles." "You mean Don Glory?" "Yes, he seldom spends time with the other nobles and was even frequently absent from social events held by the lord. However, no one can deny that he's an excellent knight." "I don't know this side of Mr. Furlan," Brian said in great surprise. "There's a lot you don't know about him." Sir Eltec smiled and added, "He's stubborn as a stone. He filled me with rage by marrying a civilian woman. I cut him off at that time, but then I found out that I was wrong. I could find no fault with Ms. Irene. She's as good as any noble lady, except that she doesn't have a noble title. It was hard for both of them at that time." Sir Eltec stopped and changed the subject. "I heard that you fought a bloody battle against the rebels to protect the grain preparation for Border Town?" Actually, it was Lady Nightingale who stopped them. If it was not for her, I'm afraid I'd already be dead in the basement," Brian said with a little embarrassment. "But at least, you stepped forward, right?" It's much braver than most of the other nobles who have only the titles but not the courage to fight against their enemies. I think that His Majesty did not debut a knight for your social skills. You're a qualified knight as long as you remain who you are. I see, Brian felt touched and said, "Thank you for telling me that. It's all right. Take it as a casual chat between us." "Seeing you reminded me of Furlan, so I couldn't hold my tongue," Sir Eltec said while touching his beard. After a while, Brian asked in a muffled voice. "So, what about the other thing that Miss Edith has mentioned? The social activities of the nobles are boring and dull. You really care about her, don't you?" Sir Eltec watched Brian with interest. No. I'm just curious." Brian promptly waved his hands and explained, "She disapproved of these kind of activities at that time, but now you can see that she seems to enjoy it very much." "Well," Sir Eltec smacked his lips and said. "What should I say? Some people can handle everything properly, even when they don't like to do some of those things. I think Miss Edith is a strong performer among those people. Properly cope with unenjoyable things? It's not a rare thing," Sir Eltec shrugged and continued. "They're gifted and naturally good at many things, but that doesn't mean they like everything that they have to do. After all, as a duke's daughter, social skills are already in her blood. His Majesty needs someone like her," Brian sighed. "Maybe," Sir Eltec said non-committally, "but that doesn't mean His Majesty doesn't need other kinds of people. As I've said before, no one is good at everything. Focusing on what you're best at is not worse than covering everything, as there's a limit to a man's energy. That's why you're also well recognized by His Majesty." Eltec paused momentarily and added, "I think he's right based on the changes I've seen in the city of Neverwinter." Chapter 589, The Storm in the Fjords. A storm was brewing on the sea to the east of the Fjords Islands. Every now and then, lightning struck through the grey clouds that hung low in the sky. Muffled thunders like the angry roars of the gods in the sky sounded as if they came from far away. Heidi Morgan's mood was no better than the weather. She had not received any news since she sent Iffy and Soft Feathers to the western region. She understood that the long distance would make it difficult to send any message back, but she also knew that Honey was there in the western region of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. That meant that they could threaten her and seize one of her animal messengers to send a message. What's really going on in the domain of the Lord? Heidi thought and irritably shut the window to block the howling wind. The situation on Sleeping Island was getting worse and worse for her. Since Tilly started the sleeping spell, all non-combat witches were on her side, and facts had also proven that the ordinary people of the fjords showed a greater need for assistant witches. As this place did not face any enemy now, the local chambers of commerce hired witches mainly for commercial purposes or opening new water channels. Under such circumstances, the status of the weak witches was raised rapidly and now seemed on equal terms with the combat witches. Besides, there were common people. Damn it, how come I didn't think of this, Heidi thought bitterly. She had thought that if she represented the combat witches all the time, she would not lag behind Tilly, as there were only two groups of people on the island. However, as more and more ordinary people immigrated to the island, the third group formed. Those people recognized and trusted only Tilly since they were only influenced by the local chambers of commerce. As a result, Tilly left the island almost routinely to visit the other islands as a distinguished guest, especially after she gained Thunder's support. The thought of this drove Heidi into a blind rage. She believed that Tilly made friends with ordinary people in the name of promoting integration only for the purpose of increasing her own influence. Heidi thought Tilly was deceiving everyone. Tilly was selling the home of witches to the ordinary people bit by bit. If things went on like this, she would never be able to replace Tilly Wimbledon. This was the first time that Heidi found there was little she could do about a 20-year-old girl. Heidi's intention of leaving Sleeping Island with the combat witches was stronger than before. She wanted to ask Camilla, the chief butler of Sleeping Island, when could the charming beauty take them to the Western Aegean. But just at the moment, her door was pushed open. "My lady, I've something urgent to report." Skyflare rushed in and said, looking anxious. "What's going on?" Seeing the look on her face, Heidi could not help but feel surprised, as Skyflare was the best and had followed her for the longest time among the witches of her association. "There's a new witch here on Sleeping Island. I heard that her name was Annie." "So what?" Heidi said in confusion. It's not a rare thing that wild witches came to Sleeping Island after the merchants got the news out. "She's from Kingdom of Wolfheart," Skyflare said in a muffled voice. "I've met her before." Thunder suddenly crashed in the sky. Heidi's heart skipped a beat and soon realized what Skyflare meant by urgent, saying, "You mean she's the one Bloodfang Association has rejected?" "It's impossible. She may just be her namesake. I thought that way at the beginning, but she looked very similar to the Annie I had met several years ago. I hid in the crowd to steal a glance at her when she was carried into the palace." "Are you sure?" "My lady, I'm not sure about the other witches, but Annie is different. Back then, she brought a friend with her." "That was Iffy." Skyflare grated and continued. "Iffy cried all the way for Annie, wanting to go back, so I remembered her appearance." "How could this happen?" "They should be." Heidi grabbed Skyflare by collar and asked, "Did you let her go?" "No, my lady, I did what you ordered me to do. Please believe me. I'll never betray you," Skyflare argued. Heidi looked into her eyes and then slowly released her, asking, "What happened to her?" "You said that she was carried into the palace just now." Skyflare took a breath and said, "She seemed to be infected with a cold epidemic and was seriously ill. The keep has already sent someone to invite Della. Della cannot cure a cold epidemic, but she could calm a patient down by cutting off the pain." Heidi paced back and forth in the room for a while and asked, "Tilly isn't here on the island, right?" "Yes, she went to Twin Dragon Island 2 days ago. She seemed to be busy with the preparation for the exploration of the sea." Heidi stopped and said, "Bring Nightfall here and let Shaji go to get more information. Shaji has never seen Annie, so she won't be recognized." "Yes, my lady." It began to pour. Raindrops pattered against the window, and Heidi sat by the table speechlessly. Skyflare and Nightfall stood aside, waiting for Heidi's order. The atmosphere was quite tense. A burst of rapid footsteps broke the silence. The door was opened and then shut again. Shaji returned and leaned against the door. She took off her wet clothing and straw hat and then heaved a long sigh. "That witch called Annie is already asleep. According to Della, her condition is not good, as the cold epidemic has already infected her lungs. She must have been ill for quite a long time." "Is it? So what's Camilla planning to do?" Heidi said in a grave tone. "She said there's a witch in the western region of the Kingdom of Grey Castle who could cure all kinds of diseases. She's going to send Annie to the western region when the rainstorm stops." Heidi felt so irritated that she wanted to laugh. Hiring One-Eyed Jack for a round trip in the fjords would cost nearly 100 gold royals. Camilla always found excuses to refuse her requests for traveling to the other islands or to the Kingdom of Grey Castle, but now for a useless, strange witch, she was willing to send out the charming beauty? There was another thing she found completely intolerable. If Annie went to the western region and met Iffy, what she had done before would be exposed. No matter what, she had to make Annie stay on the island or shut up forever. Heidi contained her anger and turned to Nightfall. "You can make her sleep forever, right?" Nightfall winced and said, "You mean seed of peaceful death?" "Yes, I can, but why?" "Because she's a traitor of Bloodfang Association. You don't have to know the details. Just remember she can't be excused." Heidi impatiently interrupted. "Is she also a combat witch? Why not wait for Tilly before making the decision? If it's found out, we'll get in trouble." Nightfall questioned. Heidi squinted, saying, "Bloodfang Association will take care of its traitors. If we hand her over to Tilly, will the naive girl punish her? What's wrong with you? Do you want to disobey my command?" "Of course, no. My lady, I'm willing to take care of this traitor for you." Nightfall shivered and promised. Chapter 590, The Witches' War. Damn it, Heidi thought indignantly, these witches' minds have already begun to fall apart, and they would have never bothered to ask why they do what they do when they were in Archduke Island. The enemies of the Bloodfang Association must be taken care of. The environment could influence a person. The ferocious cliff wolves lived in the mountains, and the dumb dogs lived in the warm house. Through the sleeping spell, assistant witches brought in many gold royals and goods for the island, turning this place into a haven. Even the combat witches had started believing Tilly's nonsense talk. Apparently, she did not have much time left to deal with it. You can control the attack time of the Seed of Peaceful Death, right? Yes. Well, when you implant the seed in Annie's body, don't make it take effect instantly, and kill her silently when she boards the charming beauty. Heidi nodded and said, now we shall visit this traitor, Annie. When Annie died on the ship as if from the cold plague, the crews would throw her body into the ocean to avoid infection. No one would ever know the truth. Shall I attack her in broad daylight? Nightfall was surprised. It would be more suspicious if you did it at night. Besides, I'm not sure whether Camilla will let me into the palace or not. Heidi glanced over at her. Shaji just learned that a witch from Kingdom of Wolfheart is sick. Isn't it pretty normal that the Bloodfang Association, which represents Kingdom of Wolfheart, come to visit her? You're right, my lady. Skyflare lifted the hood from behind her cope. If anything happens to Annie, Tilly and Camilla would still suspect us even if we weren't there. Opening the door, the harsh wind mixed with rain swarmed into the room. Putting on her raincoat and waving to the two of them, Heidi walked out into the storm. She was determined to do it. Camilla Derry appeared in the doorway as the three of them walked into the palace's compound. What do you? I heard from Shaji that a Kingdom of Wolfhearts which has arrived here. Heidi Morgan shrugged. It said that her condition is pretty bad, so we came to visit her. Annie has fallen asleep under Della's conciliation. I suppose you'd better leave her alone. Her name does ring a bell, so we just want to have a peek. We suppose maybe she was a part of us and got lost when we ran away from Archduke Island. This, after a moment's hesitation, Camilla said, okay, come in. Heidi was fed up with this conversation. A common witch dared to treat this place as her own turf and considered herself as the chief butler of Sleeping Island. Heidi sneered secretively. This woman was just Tilly's dog. If she had not said come in at last, Heidi would have taught her a lesson. On Sleeping Island, most of the abodes relied on lotus to rise from the underground, so there were very few multi-story buildings here. Tilly's palace was no exception. Going through the long corridor to the side room, Camilla leaned over and said, she's in the room. Heidi could not wait to walk into the room. She shook her head to give a signal to Skyflare. After carefully examining the girl who was lying in bed with her eyes closed, Skyflare nodded slightly. So, who sent her here? Heidi came up to Camilla and whispered to her. It looked like an act of concern, but it was actually to block her view, so Nightfall could implant the seed of peaceful death into Annie's body. Instead of answering her, Camilla gave her an odd expression. Why are you trying to kill her? Heidi was confounded. Before she could do anything, Nightfall behind her had already cried out, this witch is a fake. Turning violently, Heidi saw that the girl lying in bed had already disappeared. Nightfall could only see the magic power cohere as a small black ball suspended in midair. Seed of peaceful death. You really can go so far. Camilla shook her head. I thought you were just speaking of the combat witch, but I didn't expect that you're a brutal murderer. Shut up. Heidi's anger was out of control. She used a fatal magic power and flew at Camilla. But by the time she could reach Camilla, the girl's figure had turned into mist. Now Heidi knew what had happened. Shadow, come out. She gritted her teeth. There were hurried footsteps rising from the corridor. The witches hiding in the dark were evacuating from this place fully. Skyflare, get her. Yes. The latter dashed out of the side room, took a deep breath, and breathed out a stream of red flames. The flames crept along the walls and chased the targets as if it had its own consciousness. It burnt the windows and doorframes along the way. Ah! A scream came from far away. Nightfall hurriedly said, My lady, we need to get out of here as soon as possible. They lied to you. This whole thing is a trap. Get away from the window. Shadow's scream made Heidi feel better, but she also knew that they could not stay here very long. She just could not understand how Tilly could know what had happened to the Bloodfang Association years ago. Out of the palace, the three of them stopped. In the heavy rain, a black-haired woman stood in the courtyard. Her eyes shone like golden stars, which could be clearly seen even in the mist of the rain. The three of them felt fear even though she stood without weapons. It was the extraordinary Ashes. Usually, she would stay with Tilly Wimbledon. Turning her head, Heidi saw two familiar figures appear in the palace's doorway. Andrea and Shadow. Shadow was making faces at the three of them nonchalantly. Apparently, the previous scream had been fake. If they were both here, it meant that Tilly had not left Sleeping Island at all. Heidi was at an absolute loss after realizing the truth. Don't bother to explain. I can spare your life if you give in now, Ashes said this word by word. No one would think she was bluffing. As an extraordinary, she was a natural enemy of all witches as long as she wore the God's Stone of Retaliation. Heidi would have taken action earlier if it were not for her. But there was still a chance they could win. The breakthrough was at the palace's doorway. She could threaten Ashes if she could capture Ash's two partners. Without hesitation, she grabbed Nightfall and rushed toward the front door of the palace. Skyflare, stop Ashes. As a combat witch, dagger and crossbow were the best weapons she could use when her magic power could not be exerted. Skyflare pulled out her dagger and dashed toward Ashes. Nightfall knew her intentions, so at the same time she summoned the Seed of Symbiosis. A threat was useless unless fear supports it. Heidi had already made up her mind to kill one of them, and leave one as hostage. Of course, Shadow, who had taunted her for such a long time, was her main target. But seeing Andrea hold a long bar in her hand calmly, she was shocked. What was that? Then a loud roar made her fall into a deep torpor. Chapter 591, The New Journey. Heidi slipped and fell in the rain, the flowing rain pouring into her mouth, nose, and collar. It was hard to describe her true feelings. Although she did not feel much pain in her body, she was powerless after the fall. Don't worry about me. Go and kill her, she shouted out, not even bothering to examine her injuries. But Nightfall disappointed her. The combat witch from the Bloodfang Association hesitated, then stopped and came back to her finally, asking, My lady, are you all right? Moron. We could only turn the tables if we seized them. If we couldn't, what was the point of staying unharmed? She wanted to vent her anger but found that she was too tired to open her mouth and say anything. Behind her, she heard Skyflare scream, and the fights gradually died away. It was very difficult for her to resist long when faced with the extraordinary Ashes. The paralytic feeling in her body began to fade, but a nervous flush along her thighs which pricked painfully was very noticeable once she was soaked with the rain. Heidi managed to look up but only saw Andrea walking slowly toward her. Don't you want to give up resistance? Yes, Nightfall answered. She turned around and knelt down. I give in. Please don't kill Lady Heidi. Andrea wiped the water on her head and said, If I intended to kill her, she'd be dead by now. Her Highness Tilly hasn't yet figured something out, so I must spare her life for now. As soon as all the evidence against her is certain, she'll be justly punished. Evidence? Nightfall was at a loss. Annie betrayed the Bloodfang Association's witches. This is why my lady planned to harm her. Oh? Is that what she told you? As far as I'm concerned, Annie never joined the Bloodfang Association. Andrea shrugged. You'll know what kind of person she is when the truth is revealed. Then she turned and shouted to Shadow, Go and fetch Pandora to stop the bleeding from her wounds, or she'll be doomed. At that moment Heidi finally felt the pain, and her whole leg could not move. It felt like a mass of heaviness beneath her yet did not belong to her. A sharp pain in her leg replaced the burning feeling, making her feel a bit better. It was over. And she knew exactly what would happen next. Tilly must have somehow learned the truth about her since she dared to do this. It was not difficult to find the truth with a bit of clue. Even if the Sleeping Islands witches could not find the truth, those people in the western region could. She was afraid this had something to do with Iffy and Soft Feathers. She had belittled Tilly. Heidi thought for a moment. Then she gritted her teeth and released her magic power with her last ounce of strength just as Andrea turned her head. She could destroy anything hollow within 10 steps from the inside, whether they were living things or vessels. She called it power of pulverizing. Although a defeat was inevitable, Heidi was not willing to let Tilly win so easily. At least she wanted to teach Tilly an unforgettable lesson. "No, my lady." Nightfall noticed and cried out. It was too late. Heidi sneered secretively. But her power did not take effect. An invisible barrier dispersed her power of pulverizing. "You're wearing the God's Stone of Retaliation," Heidi mumbled with dilated eyes. "Wait. The thing that had hurt me wasn't Andrea's new ability? You do seem quite energetic, you incorrigible by *ch, Andrea said with disgust, raising the iron bar and smashing it with all her might. Heidi was instantly blind. This is the end. Seeing Heidi Morgan and Skyflare being carried away, Andrea asked Ashes, "So how are things on your end?" "It's okay, but I'm afraid that Skyflare may not survive until the day when we arrive in the western region." Lady Tilly said to keep them alive if possible. "Why did you do it?" she said with a look of disdain. Ashes licked the raindrop at the corner of her mouth and said, "I never thought she would be so desperate and risk her life to win. Besides, she does have technical fighting skills. Of course, I could have captured her alive, but I worried that something might go wrong at the essential moment. So I had to do it quickly." Andrea was speechless. The Extraordinary sighed. If you had shown the glass bead earlier, maybe they wouldn't have risked their lives in the end. But you chose to hold the flintlock, how could they know what it was? Stop arguing. Lady Tilly is still waiting for your report. Shadow reminded them helplessly. Besides, you can't stand in the rain and argue. What if you get typhoid? The two looked at each other for a moment, and then exchanged a despised look to end this argument, walking side by side to the palace. After giving her report, Andrea noticed that Tilly did not look well. After solving this great trouble, Tilly did not look happy or relieved. On the contrary, she seemed a little glum. Ashes took her hands in hers and asked, "What's the matter? Are you sick?" Tilly shook her head. "When I first saw Roland's letter, I didn't believe what was in it," she said with a sentimental tone. "We witches have finally found our own home. Why did they want to repeat the tragedy of the past years? Isn't it better to live in this place and be satisfied? You've done a great job." Ashes comforted her, saying, "Not all the combat witches will unconditionally accept Heidi's way of doing things, especially when our living standards have improved. Some of them have already supported us, even members of the Bloodfang Association are no exception." "She's right," said Andrea. Although she did not like Ashes, Andrea did not want to upset Tilly. The fact that Nightfall didn't obey Heidi and fight to the death is proof. Given time, all the people will gather together firmly, just like the Witch Union. "I hope so." Tilly took a deep breath. "Since Heidi did this, I can't indulge her anymore." But according to Iffy's view, most of the witches in the Bloodfang Association knew nothing about it, so later I'll ask Camilla to call them here. If they're willing to stay here and wait for results, we won't treat them as enemies. The two nodded. Sleeping Island had finally become boisterous, so no one wished these people to leave. "When the storm is over, we'll bring Heidi to the western region," she continued. "To fight against the church?" Ashes was excited. "Yes," closing her eyes, Tilly said in a low voice, "to fight against the Judgment Army, God's Punishment Army, pure witches, and the battle of divine will. Just as Roland said in his letters, witches will embrace real liberation if we can completely crush down the church. I would help him even if he wasn't my brother, for it helps me too." She paused for a while. "Care to join me?" "Of course," Ashes answered without hesitation, "I'll always be with you." Andrea nodded, but oddly enough, the smell of ice cream bread appeared in her mind. Chapter 592, An Unexpected Change. Roland sat in his office while listening to the news from the front line. The drawbridge, beep, of Silver City had been put down, beep. We're going, beep, to break into the church, beep. Got it, be careful, Nightingale replied. It seems that this is the maximum range of communication. Roland spread the map, drawing a circle on the position of Silver City. We should set up a relay station here in order to directly contact the eastern and northern regions. He had been obsessed with the feeling of being in complete control of the situation from far away since he had sigils of listening. The quick exchange of information seemed to bring him back to modern times. At this moment, he felt like sitting in a command hall, controlling every phase of the war situation. Just like tracking sigil, however, which could not guide accurately beyond its valid range, sigil of listening was also limited by distance. The voice would not keep clear and steady if one sigil was too far away from another. To deliver his commands to the whole country, he needed at least one transfer station. But the number of sigils isn't enough. You've only made 4 pairs, and an action like the tooth extraction campaign would need 2 pairs. It's not easy to catch a demon twice, Nightingale said and placed a piece of dried fish between her lips. Roland noticed this problem, too. As the sigils permitted only one-way information transmission, the witches had to hold 2 sigils, one for sending the information and the other one for receiving, in order to achieve the effect of an instant message system. It could be considered extremely efficient compared to a carrier pigeon or human messenger. According to Agatha, the sigils could be further improved. Its quality depended on the magic power of the blood mixed during the making process. For example, the effect of sigil of listening produced by Anna was better. Given that, mixing her blood with a senior demon's blood during the process created a pair of sigil of listening that was powerful enough to cover the entire kingdom of Grey Castle. Beep. There's something wrong. Beep. Just wait a minute. Sylvie said intermittently. Hearing that by the table, Nightingale and Roland brightened into alert attention. Pure witches? Or the moving black holes of magic power? Nightingale swallowed the piece of dried fish and asked. They could directly fire at the former, but the latter, which could be believers of the church who wore God's stones or the God's punishment army who could naturally resist the magic power, were hard to deal with. No. Beep. I didn't see the reaction of. Beep. God's stones. No God's stones? Roland asked, frowning. No. There's nothing, beep, in the church. The sound paused for a moment. We are going in. Beep. The basement is empty. Nightingale and Roland looked at each other, speechless, wondering whether the church had escaped or not. It's possible, said Roland, and chagrined for a while. I was too cautious. As of now, the First Army was the most unstoppable in the country, and no noble was stupid enough to go right into the king's line of fire, but some might still send secret messages to the church. For the church, it was a natural choice to retreat with all the supplies of the city, thinking there was no chance of winning. Different from the battles which captured Longsong's stronghold and Fallen Dragon Ridge, the nobles probably chose to be onlookers during this war. After he seized Redwater City, the churches in the other cities may have already received messages delivered via pigeons, which noted, Prince Roland is searching for God's stones of retaliation. If we divided the army into 3 groups to attack the 3 cities at the same time, we would have conquered them all, said Roland. It's hard to say. After all, only Sylvie can see through the ambushes of the enemies. If one group had encountered powerful pure witches, the troops would have suffered a heavy loss. Your decision wasn't bad, Nightingale said, lifting a piece of dried fish to his mouth. Roland was taken by surprise. He bit the dried fish and said, You become comforting now. She gave him a sly grin and said, Do you feel better now? If not, I can massage your shoulders. Wendy taught me a massage technique that'll make you relaxed. Wendy? Nightingale raised her eyebrows and said, She's very versatile. You know, the Witch Cooperation Association trekked a long distance and suffered a lot. It was Wendy who took care of our sisters and stabilized our team. No one could do better than her. If it was not for her, Kara's bad temper would have driven everyone away. Roland rubbed his chin for a while. There were not any government affairs to deal with for now, and the First Army had successfully entered Silver City. Given that, he thought it was just the time to have a break. He was about to accept Nightingale's massage when the magic stones in her arms alerted again. This time the voice was very clear, like a shout in the ear. "It's lightning, repeat, it's lightning, do you copy?" As the witches were lacking in entertainments, Roland chose some wonderful stories for them in nature courses to improve their interests in studies and enrich their knowledge. Since Lightning heard the story that Sky could be conquered by pilots, she had been addicted to their advanced conversation mode. Roland, however, still felt a little awkward communicating this way. After Nightingale activated another group of magic stones, Roland cleared his throat and said, "I've got you, speak please." The red mist behind the snow mountain disappeared. "No, it's disappearing." "What? Are you sure?" Roland and Nightingale asked simultaneously. "Yes, Maggie is here, too. You can ask her. The red mist has indeed faded away." "Coo. It's not right. You should say this is Maggie, and then report." "Cuckoo? Where are you now?" "Don't get close to Devil's Town, and hurry back now," Roland said, trying to control their impulses to explore. If they chose to fly directly into Devil's Town to investigate and encountered a senior demon there, they would be in real trouble. "Got it." Lightning replied quickly. "Get Agatha for me." "Maybe only she knows what's going on," Roland said to Nightingale. Since the witches killed the magic slayer, he had been monitoring the demons behind the snow-capped mountains. There was one animal messenger in each troop who guarded the coal carrier ships that went to the source of the Redwater River in batches of 4 or 5. Besides, he ordered Lightning and Maggie to practice between the Snow Mountain and the Mist Forest in case of a surprise attack of demons. The demons, however, did not take their revenge, and now even the red mist began to fade away. Agatha soon came to the office, but after listening carefully to the report from Lightning, she was also puzzled. The Union could rarely get close to Devil's Town, and I'd never heard of their retreat during battles, even in the wars that lasted for several decades. Keep monitoring them for now. Roland made the decision at last. Perhaps the red mist will come back, we should be cautious. He did not want to put any witch's life at risk for now. 5 days later, Lightning reported that the red mist behind the snow mountains had completely disappeared. Chapter 593, The Blackstone Forest. A reconnaissance platoon was established soon after confirming no trace of the demons in the camp. To find out the cause for the red mist's disappearance, Maggie led the probe into the camp carrying Agatha, followed by Soraya and Summer, who were not capable of escaping, were thus protected by 50 soldiers of the First Army. "We're about to arrive. Get ready to land," said Lightning, who made a gesture towards Maggie. "Ah." Agatha poked her head up and the rocky beach gradually came into her sight. As the little girl said, the heavy red mist had vanished completely, revealing the dark brown earth. Different from the dark green forest around, no trees were there in the camp area, which looked as if the soil surface was torn off. This was the first time that Agatha had approached a residence of demons. As a member of the Quest Society, Agatha could not help but feel a burst of excitement. "Lightning is landing." "Repeat, Lightning is landing. Be careful. Remember to escape immediately if there is any danger." Roland's voice came through the sigil. "Lightning understands." Folding her wings, Maggie dived sharply towards the ground. Agatha saw the landscape under her feet changing rapidly, from the blue ocean to the off-white rugged rocky wall, and then to the humid brown land. After a sudden shock, Agatha found that the huge devil beast had already landed safely. Do the demons really live in such a place? Looking from the sky, there's nothing special in this place, but now it really looks weird, Lightning clicked her tongue and said. Agatha felt the same way. The swarthy stone towers stood high on the empty ground everywhere, like a black forest in picturesque disorder. These strange buildings were the black spots that they had seen from above. The height of the higher buildings was about 3 to 4 stories, and that of the lower ones were just taller than their heads. In terms of the density, these buildings far surpassed that of a forefront battalion. It seemed that these stone towers had some functions other than the storage of the red mist. "I don't know what happened to them, but it must have happened not long ago," she said. "Why do you say that?" Lightning asked with curiosity. "As the stone towers haven't withered completely." Agatha pointed to a nearest black stone pagoda and said, "Their surfaces simply dimmed, far from being rough and fragile. They look totally different from the barren land that the Union conquered in the front line. That means, the demons didn't intend to withdraw, or, they just made a hasty decision to retreat." She paused momentarily and said, "Let's go to the center of the camp, the highest tower, where the demon lived. Maybe we can find something else. Hope Summer can find the cause." "Ah!" Lightning screamed suddenly. She was walking in the front, but instantly sunk into the ground. Seeing the frightening scene, Maggie transformed into a pigeon to fly up immediately, and Agatha also conjured up an ice barrier in front of herself. Before they took any further action, the little girl flew out of the hole in the ground and said, "I'm okay." She flapped her body to clear away the dirt and complained, "Who dug a trap here? What a naughty gremlin." Agatha sighed with relief inwardly and prepared to disperse the ice barrier. Yet the following words of Lightning made her heart jump in her throat again. Here's a demon." "It's true, but the demon seems to be dead," Maggie perched on the head of Lightning and said. "Maybe. Otherwise, I would be in trouble." The little girl patted her chest and said, still quite scared. Holding an ice spear in hand, Agatha came over to have a look. As Maggie said, a mad demon stood in the soil pit with its head slouching, and a chunk of its bare skin had dried and curled, like the salted fish exposed to the scorching sun. "I remember Sylvie once said that the demons were hiding under the ground, right?" Agatha said, and further confirmed her judgment. Whether the demons decided to withdraw or met with some other incident at that moment, it must have been some emergency. Otherwise, these demons wouldn't die by exhausting the red mist underground little by little before receiving the new orders. "We'd better fly to investigate." "I don't want to fall in a trap again," Lightning mumbled. Carrying Agatha on her back, Lightning flew forward slowly, remaining close to the ground. After they bypassed rows of stone towers, they suddenly got a wider view. An open field in the camp appeared. Agatha gasped and said. Judging from the spot, it was obvious that the open field was not left deliberately by the demons, as a huge cavern could be seen in the center of it. It had a size almost equal to that of the square border town, and many debris of the stone tower scattered around it. The three witches stood by the bottomless hole and looked down, attempting to see where it led to. "It seems the same as the place where we found you. How about let me go down and explore first?" Lightning smacked her lips and said. "No. You can't." "No, coo." Agatha and Maggie stopped Lightning at the same time. "Okay," the little girl said and sighed with a look of regret. She had restrained herself a lot from her desires to take risks after being punished by His Majesty to do test questions. "So, let's take a walk around it." The rest of the place in the camp had slight differences. Of course, the exploration of the three witches was not fruitless. Maggie found a large number of magic stones in a flat-roofed stone tower and a withered, dead chaos beast. Actually, she just wanted to perch on the top of the tower for a while, but happened to find a narrow entrance there, which may serve as an air duct that the demons used to imbue the red mist. The first army arrived at Rocky Beach 2 days later. Lotus found a slit chapped in the mountain, and dug a path out in the rocky wall, which could allow only one person to go through. Maggie, at the same time, was responsible for transporting the important equipment like heavy machine guns. It took great effort to deliver 50 soldiers and witches into the inland area. This was the first contact between the indigenous people and the alien demon race. Even the hardiest soldier would felt dread and panic at the sight of such an incredible scene. Roland had expected that and ordered his people to pitch a camp nearby the entrance to the rocky wall to avoid overstraining themselves. As for Summer's replaying work, the First Army was not allowed to watch. According to Agatha's judgment, the time at which the high tower in the camp disappeared should be between 1.5 weeks to 1 month ago. The consumption of Summer's magic power would be accelerated if the retrospective time exceeded 1 week. As for the events that happened 1 month ago, they could only be replayed once a day. Under such circumstances, there was no shortcut except for trying again and again. Among the magic stones brought back by Maggie, there were some practical ones. The quality of these magic stones could not match with those obtained from fearsome demons, but it was better than nothing. Now the spellcaster tower to be completed soon only lacks a living demon. It would take a long time to find the accurate time of the incident that happened to the demons. Roland developed new gadgets as he waited for the result. He received the second secret letter from the fjords. It said that Tilly Wimbledon was about to arrive at Shallow Beach of the Western region. Chapter 594, Shallow Beach and Reunion. What a pleasant surprise, thought Roland. Out of his expectation, Tilly herself would also come here instead of just sending several combat witches to help him. That meant she had already solved the trouble on Sleeping Island, or that she did not have to worry about the stability of the island for now. The day after he received the letter, Roland waited for Tilly at Shallow Beach with Anna and the other witches. After half a month, traces of chiseling could clearly be seen on the beach of sand and mud. Simple wooden board houses and work sheds had already been built around the slope, which were the prototype of the future warehouse and sailor dormitory. The windward sides of the wooden houses were painted with an orange anti-corrosion coating to protect them from the sea wind, and meanwhile, the coating also made the houses look very nice and striking. A 30 meters long beachhead was leveled, and its external side was made of bricks. It now worked as a temporary dock, and the natural deep-water harbor here even saved Roland the trouble of building trestle. Even the 3-masted ships could berth here directly by the side of the dock. As it was the first time for most of the witches to see Shallow Beach during the development stage, they all looked around with curiosity. Is that huge pit the collapsed shipyard? What are they doing over there right now? Anna walked to Roland and then pointed to a distant place where many workers seemed very busy with their jobs. You've heard about it, too, Roland said with a little embarrassment. Of course, Nana told me on the day that 3 workers broke their legs. The collapse of the shipyard and the explosion of the coke oven in a test run were both major accidents of this year in the border area. The latter could be considered as a price he had to pay during development and exploration. The former, however, was mostly caused by his own careless mistakes. Given the soft ground condition in Shallow Beach, Minister of Construction, Carl, had proposed that the shipyard should be built near the hills as the place could provide them a more solid foundation. Roland, however, had refused Carl's suggestion at once because of the time limit. As it had already taken a long time to build the slope by sinking the hills, if they built the shipyard in the old way, he would have to wait until the next year to begin building the steam vessel for Thunder. As for the soft foundation problem, he had thought it was not a big deal, as long as he let Lotus build a steel structure of the shipyard and poured concrete in to protect it. The project had gone well as he had expected in the initial stage. The vertical walls which had been designed to protect the steel structure had seemed to be quite sturdy after the concrete had set. Roland had been very pleased with himself at the time, thinking that those civil engineering experts were just SOSO. To his surprise, an accident had eventually happened when the workers had been installing the portcullis. As soon as the 1-arm-thick portcullis had been released by hummingbirds, it had fallen down with the concrete walls on its both sides, burying the installing workers inside. Even though the hummingbirds had immediately made the portcullis as light as a feather, the workers had already been heavily injured at the time. None of them could survive if it was not for Nana. Later investigation revealed that during the process of pouring the concrete, some sand and mud had sunk under the workers' feet and fallen to the bottom. As a result, the vertical walls had not tightly clung to the floor and the seemingly sturdy joining parts between the floor and the vertical walls were just a thin layer of concrete. The moment when the heavy portcullis had been set into the wall, the steel structure had failed to sustain the weight and collapsed with the walls suddenly. In the modern time, that was a grievous fault of Roland. In this era, however, casualties frequently occurred during construction and no one would take it seriously, let alone blaming the Lord for it. Only Roland himself would feel guilty and deeply sorry for the workers. He cleared his throat to gather himself together and said, "They're building earth-retaining wall with wooden posts. To prevent the earth beside the shipyard from collapsing?" Anna soon got what Roland meant. It's just like roots of a tree. The wooden posts are crossed and inserted into the ground to increase friction, so the vertical walls won't fall down," Roland nodded and said. This time, he would carefully check whether there were sunk sands and mud in the structure when pouring the concrete in, as he had already got his lesson. "Look, here comes a ship," Mystery Moon shouted in a sudden. All the people looked at the place where the sea and the sky met and saw a sailing ship with a pink flag moving slowly towards them. No doubt, a ship traveling round southernmost Cape to the inland of the western region must be the charming beauty from Sleeping Island. When the ship got close to Shallow Beach, it teetered on the sea for a while to readjust the direction before it berthed by the beach. Apparently, they had not recognized Shallow Beach at the first sight. Roland met Tilly Wimbledon, Princess Tilly of Kingdom of Grey Castle, again. He gave his right hand to her, and then shook hands warmly with her. They had not seen each other for several months, but seeing the smiling look on each other's face, they still felt closely connected. What a wonderful reunion, Roland thought. The witches did not greet Tilly and her witches in such a reserved manner. Honey, Candle, and Evelyn immediately came up and hugged their old friends. Andrea bent her arm around Nightingale's shoulders, completely neglecting the manner of a noble lady. Wendy held Ash's hand, asking about her recent situation. Soft Feathers, however, was greatly surprised as she found that a witch of the Bloodfang Association also came with Tilly. "Why did you come here?" Soft Feathers walked to a witch who looked a little pale and asked, "Did Heidi Morgan send you here because she did not get any report from Iffy and me?" "No, Lady Heidi is on the ship now," the witch answered while shaking her head. "What? You mean she also comes to the western region?" Soft Feathers exclaimed in surprise, catching everyone's attention. It was not hard to tell from her voice that she was frightened. "Who's Heidi?" "She seems to be the leader of the Bloodfang Association?" "Ah, yes. Iffy mentioned her." "What's she going to do here?" Roland looked at Tilly and asked, "Have you settled your differences with her?" "If you mean controlling her right now, yes I do. My plan worked and Heidi did try to kill the Annie we faked. But she refused to tell me where the witches rejected by the Bloodfang Association went. She said she would only tell you when she saw you," Tilly said, spreading her hands. "Me?" Roland asked confusedly. "Yes, I guess she considers you her last life-saving straw." Tilly blinked her eye and continued, "Now you're the ruler of Grey Castle, representing the secular nobles. She probably thinks if she gives you enough profits, you'll save her or even help her to regain her power in the kingdom of Wolfheart. Are you reminding me of what I should do?" Roland could not help but laugh. He had to admit that Tilly was quite cute when she pretended to be careless and beat about the bush. "Trust me. If I'm a man who'll exchange witches' lives for profits, you'll never bring her here." "Well, so who's this witch I'm going to meet?" "I think I've never met her before." "Nightfall, a combat witch of the Bloodfang Association. If it's not for her who uses Seed of Symbiosis to sustain Heidi's life, I'm afraid Heidi won't make it to City of Neverwinter," Tilly answered. Chapter 595, Germination. Did Heidi get hurt during the capture? She got shot in her leg. We've stopped the bleeding, but she probably can't walk for now." "How is everyone else?" "A witch of the Bloodfang Association named Skyflare died last night." Tilly sighed and said, "My witches are all right." Roland nodded and said, "I'll tell Nana to cure her. As for the other things, let's talk about them after we get back to the castle." Compared with interrogating the leader of the Bloodfang Association, the church invasion was the top priority for Roland now. After he returned to his office, he asked first about the situation of Sleeping Island and then showed the letter from the northern region to Tilly and the other witches. Ashes and Andrea were also there, as the three big families in the king's city of the Kingdom of Dawn were also involved. Since Roland received the secret warning letter, he had contacted Hillfox twice to get a clear idea of what had happened. After he told the witches all he knew, Andrea could not help shaking her head and said, "Foolish Otto, he still behaves just the same as he did when he was little. He would never dare to enter the palace without Oro. But at least, he succeeded in revealing what the church was doing to us. Besides, he did it mainly because of you." Ashes shrugged and said. "Have you replied to him?" Tilly asked Roland. "I urged him not to act rashly. As even the god stone of retaliation could not affect the witch, it's almost impossible for ordinary people to defeat her. Besides, Prince Appin mentioned that there were God's punishment warriors too. The Kingdom of Dawn is too far away from the Kingdom of Grey Castle. I can't offer him any help directly. Under such circumstances, it's a wise decision to pretend to know nothing about the church's secret until the church focuses on the Kingdom of Grey Castle," Roland said while pouring tea for everyone. "He may not be able to control himself well. Acting on impulses has been a habit of Otto Luashi ever since he was a child," Andrea said with a frown. "He'll control himself well, because I told him something else." Roland smiled and added, "I told him that Andrea was safe at my place, and the enemy could hardly hurt her, even if she had to fight against the church. I also warned him that if he died, he would never have the chance to meet his Andrea again." "Very persuasive," Ashes whistled and said. "Enough," Tilly promptly spoke at this moment in order to prevent a coming spat. She stared at Roland, blaming him for making fun of this matter, and then changed the subject by asking, "What are you going to do about the church's invasion?" "Ahem. I'm going to build a defensive line with guns and cannons under Coldwind Ridge," said Roland. He took a map out of his drawer and spread it on the desk. He pointed at the border of the northern region, saying, "Since I got the news, I've already sent the First Army to deliver war materials to Deep Valley Town and at the same time, to wipe out the influence of the church in my kingdom. Given that, Holy City of Hermes will soon sense the intention of Grey Castle to garrison Coldwind Ridge. Do you want to purposely reveal your actions to your enemy? I hate to be blunt, but most of the time, the information deliberately leaked to the enemy must be false and delusive, right?" Andrea asked. "But it's the only way that I can ensure where the church is going to attack first, and by doing so, my people will suffer less. A head-on confrontation is also what the First Army is best at in battles," Roland explained his plans. "I see. It's a pretty good idea," Tilly nodded and said. "But there's still a hidden danger, the pure witches. With strong firepower, we don't have to worry about the visible enemies, but the witches of the church may cause unexpected troubles for the First Army, as we know nothing about the pure witches. Only our witches with magic power can guard against them," Roland added. "That's why we're here. Trust me, my big brother. The witches of Sleeping Island will fight with you," Tilly replied. Back at the witch building, Tilly had returned to her original apartment that she had lived in before. The living room and bedroom looked exactly the same as she had seen them the last time. There was no dust on the table. Apparently, Roland must have often had this place cleaned. 3 wooden basins used for bathing were prominently displayed near the door. Clean clothes were nicely folded and placed in the basins, and beside them, there were sandals that were easy to wear. Brought up in a royal family, Tilly had accustomed herself to taking baths regularly, but even she had never bathed so frequently like she did at this place where the warm water for bathing was available all the time. When she followed the aroma of fresh food to open the cupboard, she found it was filled with various kinds of seasoning, dried meat floss and bread. She could easily fill her stomach any time she felt hungry. Princess Tilly had never been a person who really cared a lot about material comforts, but she could not help but feel warm in her heart seeing the scene. "Ah. I can use scented soap for bathing again. Huh, the towels in the basin seem to be brand new," Andrea talked loudly in the living room. "Isn't it good for you to have new towels?" Ashes questioned. "Yes, for me, but not for you. It's a waste to offer you a new towel." "What did you say?" "I think that rag you brought will do. Why does a person who can tolerate bathing in salty, smelly seawater need a tell. Hearing the familiar bickering voices, Tilly smiled silently. She thought that everyone seemed to like Neverwinter, and even the Bloodfang Association witches changed after they came here. She felt that she also liked this city as everyone else did. The improvement in life quality might be one of the reasons for the other witches' changes, but not for Princess Tilly, who had been adored by King Wimbledon III. Compared to her life in the palace, the life here was just fresh and interesting, but not luxurious. What attracted the witches the most must be another thing. Staying in this city, Tilly would naturally feel relaxed, and yet she had no idea about why she would feel this way until today. When Roland had been pouring tea for the witches himself, she had suddenly realized. Roland truly accepted the witches and treated them as friends instead of just pretending to be friendly to witches who could offer him help. No matter who he was, the lord, the prince or the king, Tilly could tell that his attitude remained the same all the time. He did consider witches as his friends, which he was not faking at all. "Are you all right?" Hearing Ashes behind her, she turned around and saw that she gently closed the door of the kitchen. "Huh? Why did you call him Big Brother today? On Sleeping Island, didn't you say that you helped him only to help yourself? And, you said he was not like Prince Roland at all," Ashes hesitated and asked. "I don't think he's the stupid, cowardly elder brother of mine, and I don't care whether he's him or not." Tilly paused momentarily and asked, "Have you ever considered the meaning of this war against the church? Retaliation?" "No," Tilly shook her head and said, "it means freedom of life." "Have you ever thought of moving here?" Chapter 596, Home of the Free. Greatly surprised, Ashes said, "What did you say?" "I've never thought of leaving you." "That's not what I mean. To tell the truth, this place is not bad, and you like it, right?" Tilly explained, finding out that Ashes misunderstood her. After a moment of hesitation, Ashes nodded and said, "The Witch Cooperation Association must have their reason to stay here and work for Roland, but we're different. We have our own home." Tilly interrupted Ashes, saying, "There are only 3 possible endings for us in this war. The first is that we get defeated by the God's punishment army and die in the last ditch in the northern region. Under such circumstances, neither Sleeping Island nor Neverwinter matters to us anymore. I swear, by my life." "My lady, you'll never die at that kind of place," Ashes said and hurriedly covered Princess Tilly's mouth with her hand, and even used the honorifics in her haste. Tilly kept looking at Ashes with a smile until Ashes removed her hand, and then said, "That's just a hypothesis. I don't think I'll get killed by the church either. So don't say it out loud." "A frequent saying of yours is that," Ashes said with worry. "It'll become a self-fulfilling prophecy," Tilly added. She walked to the small window of the kitchen to look at the castle backyard, which was full of energy and vitality, and she continued, "That's why I tell you this hypothesis at first. The second possibility is that Roland loses the war but we survive. That way, the Kingdom of Greycastle will no longer be able to resist the church, Neverwinter will be caught in fire and Roland will have only one place to go." "Sleeping Island?" "Yes, we'll continue to fight against the church on the island until the Battle of Divine will begin. Maybe the human species will be extinct hundreds of years later, but there's nothing we can do as we can't live that long." "What about the third possibility? If we defeat the church and take over Holy City of Hermes, all of the witches will be free from bullying and persecution, and the Sleeping Island's mission will be fulfilled." Fulfilled? "Yes, it's just the witches hide for now. If the church is destroyed, we won't have to confine ourselves on an island of the fjords any longer. The fjords can't offer us a pleasant environment to live because of its limited supplies and unpredictable weather. But, of course, we won't abandon Sleeping Island and we'll continue our sleeping spell. The only change is that we'll be able to choose to live in the cities we like, right? I'll always stay by your side even in hell and besieged by numerous demons. And in the world full of salted fishes and fish soup?" Ashes suddenly did not know what to say. Tilly could not help but laugh. She said, "Relax, eating too much of them makes me feel sick, too. I'll probably come to live in Neverwinter for a while every now and then. I also want some changes in diet." Hey there, what are you talking about? Andrea pushed the door open, craned her neck to look inside and asked. She wore a bathrobe and carried a wooden basin on her head. What are you going to do? Ashes asked, frowning. To take a bath, Andrea twitched her mouth and said, I have stunk after staying on this ship for over 10 days. Of course, it's not surprising that somebody just can't notice even such a strong smell of fish. Lady Tilly, are you going with me? Yes, wait for me. I'll change my clothes, Tilly replied. Ahem, so am I. Ashes pretended not to hear the satire and expressed her intention to join the bath. Come on, I did not invite you, Andrea rolled her eyes at Ashes and said. I'll accompany Tilly, not you. Don't take me wrong. Looking at them who gazed at each other in a speechless confrontation, Tilly relaxed and began to imagine that all of them would be able to live easily and happily like they did now after they defeated the church. Roland had been in a daze in his office for a long time until Nightingale came in with dried fish in her hand. Out of his expectation, Tilly, who had not recognized him as her elder brother the last time when she had been here, suddenly called him Big Brother today. Roland felt overjoyed and at the same time confused, wondering whether she really considered him as Prince Roland or just a reliable friend and guardian. Yeah, she called you Big Brother. It's not a big deal. I can call you like that if you want, Nightingale said incredulously. You're 3 years older than me. Aren't you nobles value your integrity? Roland sighed inwardly and thought, but it's not bad to have an elder sister as my. No, stop thinking about this anymore. Roland banished those thoughts and asked, what do you think that changed her attitude towards me? Who knows? Maybe she saw your sincerity, as you didn't use the Bloodfang Association witches to split Sleeping Island and you quickly declared war on the church. Compared with empty promises, those actions are more convincing. But that's just my guess. Maybe, it's just a slip of tongue, Nightingale shrugged and said. Yes, the reason isn't as important as the facts. No matter what made Tilly change, she did get closer to me. That also means I've gained wider recognition among the Sleeping Island witches, Roland thought. Then he said to Nightingale, now. It's time for us to meet Heidi Morgan. Roland stepped into the jail in the basement of the castle and saw Heidi lying unconsciously in a bed made out of straw. The wound in her leg covered with black and red blood stains healed perfectly. To ensure Nana's safety, I knocked Heidi Morgan out before Nana started to cure her. Otherwise, it would be too dangerous to take off the God's Stone of Retaliation on her. I heard from the other Bloodfang Association witch that she tried to hold Andrea as the hostage when she was besieged, Nightingale whispered in Roland's ear. I see. You did a good job. There were iron hoops mounted with God's Stones of Retaliation around Heidi's neck and wrists, and it was impossible to unlock it without special tools. They did this to her because she was a very powerful combat witch. She could cause fatal damages to all the objects within 10 steps by making them collapse inwards. According to Tilly, this kind of collapse won't be affected by any other factors, as no matter what kind of vessels Heidi used her power to affect, they would collapse. A wooden one would be crushed, while a metal one would be squashed. And abdominal cavity and thoracic cavity of a living being would also collapse and squeeze the soft inner organs out, which reminded Roland of squeezing toothpaste out of a tube. From Roland's perspective, Heidi should work in the factory instead of combating. Since she could act as a punching machine to process the raw material with molds, which was the most basic use of her ability. Roland believed that her potential would be great if she realized that there was a space between moles and between atoms during her studies. But unfortunately, he also knew that it was too late for her. Wake her up, Roland said. Nightingale nodded and dashed into the jail to lift Heidi up and drag her over to the steel bars. Roland looked down at her, saying, I'm Roland Wimbledon, King of Grey Castle. I've heard you wanted a private talk with me. You can talk to me now. Chapter 597, Blood and Fang. It took Heidi quite a long time to figure out what had happened. She first touched her thigh, which had already been cured, and then looked Nightingale up and down. After that, she finally turned her gaze to Roland and asked, Your Majesty, did you cure me? Yes, otherwise you'll make nightfall exhausted, Roland replied. He then found a chair and seated himself in front of the jail, asking, "Tell me, where did you send the witches rejected by you?" What if he told you? Yes, the witch named Annie was her friend. Instead of directly answering Roland's question, Heidi clenched her teeth. At the moment, Roland saw the hatred in her eyes. You could have given them a shelter. Archduke Island is the domain of Archduke Morgan and you're his successor. It's impossible that you can't even afford a dozen of assistant witches. Even though all you needed to do at the time was to offer them some gruel a day, you still chose to abandon them. You thought they were useless, but, in fact, assistant witches are far more powerful than you can imagine. The gun Andrea used to hurt you is a weapon made by assistant witches and ordinary people. It's very easy to operate. Even a farmer who's worked in the fields for all his life can easily use it to kill an experienced knight, Roland said. Hearing that, Heidi's face changed. She lifted up her head promptly, asking, "What did you say? Even ordinary people can use it? Do you still believe I totally depend on the witches to capture the king's city and become king of Grey Castle?" Roland leaned back in his chair and added, "If they had such a strong power, they wouldn't have been suppressed by the church and the secular lords." So, how did they make the weapon? Roland coldly stared at Heidi until she realized that she had asked an inappropriate question just now. After that, he mocked. What? Do you think we're talking at a palace banquet? Heidi swallowed hard and said, "This lady beside you is Nightingale. She works for me, not for Tilly. I want to ask you again. Where did you send the witches rejected by you?" Roland said in a deep voice. "I let them go to find the other witch organizations. I've no idea of where they went. Some of they might return to the nearby towns and cities, and some might go to the Kingdom of Dawn." "You're lying. None of this is true." Nightingale suddenly broke in before she finished. "No, Your Majesty. She knows nothing about me." "Save it, Heidi." Roland shook his head and continued, "Nightingale can tell truth from lies. You can't lie about anything in front of her. Now, you know why Tilly brought you from the fjords to the western region. You'll be tried here, and if you don't want to suffer, tell me what you did exactly." "My patience is wearing thin." In the dim firelight, the expression seemed uncertain on Heidi's face. Apparently, she did not expect that Nightingale had such an ability. After a moment of silence, Heidi grabbed the steel bars and shouted, "Your Majesty Wimbledon, the kingdom of Wolfheart has been annexed by the church, the king has been lost and now I'm the only descendant of the Morgan royal family. If you help me regain my kingdom, I'll bring you countless profits. Gold royals, gems and, yes, witches. The Bloodfang Association will also be at your command. Is this what you want to tell me at last? I'll give you half of the kingdom of Wolfheart. The land on the west of Blackstone Cliff will be yours." "Stop." Roland interrupted impatiently. "I just want to know where the witches went." "What? My kingdom can't yet compare with those witches?" Heidi said in disbelief. Roland was fed up with this and said, "Can't you understand me? The kingdom of Wolfheart isn't yours and I've no interest in the land far away from me. Due to the basic manner of a noble, I'm here to ask you first, but I have many other methods to make you tell the truth. As for torture, I think you know more than me. It'll do you no good, so tell me what you did to those witches when I'm still here. Maybe, I'll spare your life." Heidi took Roland's last sentence as a life-saving straw and confirmed. "Your Majesty, you'll really spare me? I'm a man of actions." Heidi lowered her head and said after a long hesitation, "I sent them to the nobles." Roland's heart sank a little and then he asked, "Didn't you sell them to the nobles?" "No, the whole thing is a trade-off." She took a deep breath and continued, "I could have never recruited enough witches for the Bloodfang Association if I had depended solely on the witches awakening on the Archduke Island. To attract more witches to come to me, I have to spread the name of the association throughout the kingdom of Wolfheart. You could hire rats to do the job for you." "How come was this related to the nobles?" Roland asked. He had also tried to draw witches' attention via propaganda, but as Tilly started to spread the news earlier than him, he did not succeed in recruiting many witches. Rats themselves are manipulated by nobles. Besides, once the church had found out the secret of Archduke Island, I would have been in real trouble. So, you pay back with witches to the nobles? Yes, I did this to ensure that the nobles and I were on the same boat. When they illegally kept witches, they would naturally notice the actions of the church and control the rats properly. They would even deliberately divert the holy city's attention from me. Only after making sure that the local lords were willing to accept witches, I would spread information in their domains. By doing so, I could minimize the risk, Heidi said in a low voice. Roland did not have to ask to know what had happened next to those non-combat witches. They must have been locked in the dark rooms for the whole life, and most of them had died young when the magic power bit. Even for several lucky witches who made it to the adulthood, their fate had also been sealed. They must have been dead in the hands of the nobles who had used them just to sate their own lust, or in the hands of the church who had forced the nobles to hand out the witches. At the time, Heidi clearly sensed Nightingale's anger and impulsively moved backward, saying, "Your Majesty, you promised." Roland stopped Nightingale with his arm outstretched and continued to ask, "Who did those things for you?" "If he said that you've never met Annie." "Skyflare, she was killed by ashes." "Anyone else?" "Did the other witches of the Bloodfang Association know nothing about this?" Roland asked. Heidi nodded. "Say it out." "Yes." Roland secretly let out a sigh of relief and said, "The last question. What's the purpose of your Bloodfang Association to recruit combat witches everywhere?" After a short silence, Heidi said, "I just wanted to help my father seize the throne which should belong to him." Heidi stopped, but Roland could easily guess what she was to say. After the death of Archduke Morgan, the Bloodfang Association had become Heidi Morgan's tool to fulfill her own desire for power. Walking out of the basement, Nightingale held Roland's hand in a sudden, asking, "Are you really going to spare the life of that murder?" "Heidi Morgan is a witch of Sleeping Island. It's not appropriate for me to execute her. Tilly wanted me to help in finding out the truth. That's why she took Heidi to the western region." "You mean," Nightingale's eyes started to shine. "As for whether Sleeping Island will spare her or not, that's not what I can decide," Roland said, spreading his hands. Chapter 598, The End of Her Dream. The following day, Roland told the news to Tilly and the other witches. How dare she use witches as a reward to those filthy nobles? Failing to restrain her anger, Ashes broke off before Princess Tilly could speak. If Andrea had not stopped her, she probably had already rushed to the dungeon straightaway. "Has Miss Nightingale checked the credibility of her testimony?" Tilly asked placidly. "She spilled everything after a few preliminary questions," Roland said, and told them what had happened in the cell in detail. "I thought it'd take a while for us to get her to surrender, but she's weaker than we expected." He had not expected to obtain a full confession from the prisoner yesterday, for the questioning was simply a sort of intimidation commonly practiced before the official interrogation. Because of this, he did not take the God's locket of retribution off Heidi, and Heidi did not know that Nightingale actually detected lies through magic power rather than voices either. "I see." Tilly nodded. "Thank you for doing this for me." "Don't be silly. I'm your brother." Roland immediately grabbed this opportunity, trying to sound somewhat intimate. "Plus, Heidi Morgan is also, so to speak, a witch on Sleeping Island. She should be handed over to you." "Fair enough." Tilly was silent for quite a while. "What would you do if this happened in the city of Neverwinter?" Roland gazed at her gem-like eyes and noticed more silent rages than poignancies in her grey pupils. She had already made her decision. "I'll do the same thing." Roland comforted her. At this remark, Heidi Morgan was sentenced to death. Tilly no longer hesitated. She whispered something in Ash's ear. The latter nodded and left the office. "I'll now excuse myself, brother." Roland could tell that Tilly was greatly depressed by the incident, but he did not know what to say in this scenario. When he was about to escort her to the witch building, an exhilarated scream pierced the silence. It was from the listening magic stone in Nightingale's chest. It's lightning, copy. It's lightning. Summer has found out when the incident occurred. The little girl's report stunned everybody. What did she see? Roland asked. Two monsters, big mouth, and tentacles. I don't know how to describe them. From her voice, Roland knew she was extremely hyper. This is something we've never seen. Good heavens. Your Majesty, you'd better come see it yourself. What's it? Tilly was bewildered. They're exploring the Devil's Town behind the snow-capped mountains. The red mist there completely disappeared a week ago, Roland explained, and I wanted to tell you about it today, but I almost forgot about demons. Tilly took a deep breath. You can fill me in with the details on the way. On the way? Roland was slightly surprised. Can't I go with you? She winked. Princess Tilly had indeed been strong since her childhood. She knew how to adjust herself and manage to be impersonal when facing something of great importance. Roland was secretly amazed at how quickly she could restore the tranquility of her mind upon a crisis, an essential quality for a ruler, which he, unfortunately, still had a lot to work on. If he took Tilly with him, Ashes and Andrea would certainly tag along. The trip would be, therefore, much safer. He had no reason to reject her. Yes, of course you can. Roland agreed with a nod. Heidi was leaning against the bars, waiting for Roland to get her out. The Bloodfang Association was over. Tilly would definitely not allow her to return to Sleeping Island. However, as a member of the Morgan royal family, she had found a new path for her resurrection to the throne. That was to rely on the imperial power of Grey Castle and regain her throne. Heidi had higher hopes for the reward she was going to propose than Roland's own promise. Roland did not directly make any promises, probably just because he was Tilly's brother. He owed an explanation to Sleeping Island as to the whereabouts of these missing witches. Heidi firmly believed that no noble could possibly resist such a great temptation. Half of the territory of Wolfheart would certainly bring Roland enormous fame and fortunes, and his name would also be passing down the history and become immortal. As for herself, her notoriety would be remembered by nobles in later generations. Nevertheless, she did not care about it. As long as she could successfully become the king of Wolfheart, she could abandon everything else. Only in this way could she officially start her revenge. She must avenge her father and herself on those nobles for their betrayal. She swore she would hang those traitors one by one and hung their heads above the city gate, showing the public the fate of those who had framed Archduke Morgan. The iron gate of the dungeon was suddenly flung open. Its squeaking sound appeared to be especially loud in the deadly silent dungeon. Heidi immediately got to her feet and looked toward the end of the hallway by the bars. The person who entered her sight, however, was not Roland Wimbledon, but sullen Ashes. A chill went down her spine at that very moment. What were you doing here? Where's His Majesty? You know exactly why I came here. Ashes slowly approached the cell. Heidi retreated as each step Ashes thrust forward, but she soon realized there was nowhere for her to take refuge. You should have anticipated this when you handed those innocent witches to nobles. No. Heidi shrieked. His Majesty promised me he would let the matter go. He's already pardoned me. You can't disobey the king's order. Where's he? I request to see him. Ashes grabbed the iron bars and pulled them apart by force. She went into the cell while bending over. Those witches came to the Bloodfang Association for your help, in hopes of having a good rest and being fed. Yet you failed them and sent them to hell with your own hands. The witches escaped the church's search but were betrayed by their own kind. Even if Roland has forgiven you, I can't just let it go like nothing has ever happened. Did Ashes overhear the conversation between Roland and me? Or did Roland tell the secret to Tilly and the other witches? Heidi thought. She snatched the god's locket of retribution on her neck in horror, but the locket was embedded in an iron ring. It was impossible for her to take it off barehanded. Let me help you. Ashes drew close to Heidi. She reached out her hand and lifted Heidi off the floor by her neck. the iron ring started to tighten up and Heidi soon felt suffocated. She twisted and wriggled like a fish out of water, attempting to gain a foothold on the floor but in vain. Gradually, as her vision blurred, Ash's figure started to become distant. Why did I end up like this? I don't want to die here. I'm the only successor to the throne, the future king of Wolfheart. The throne of Tusk seemed to be drifting away from her. She could once again hear the mockeries of nobles ringing in her ears. At a crack sound, the iron ring sank into her neck and stopped all her struggles. Chapter 599, A Retrospection of Magic Power. By the afternoon, Roland was prepared to head to the snow-capped mountains. The equipment he would take with him included a tent, adequate food, and a concrete paddle steamer. Since Devil's Town was coastal, he must set off from Shallow Beach. As usual, Hummingbird would be responsible for transportation. He had to admit it was a pretty queer thing that Hummingbird, who was as petite as Nana, could hold up the entire concrete boat above her head. The scene reminded Roland of an ant moving rice 10 times bigger than its own body. If Hummingbird happened to be on the other side of the boat, he would see a boat silently shifting by itself on the shore like a ghost ship. As long as Hummingbird kept her hands attached to the boat, she could help with the transportation continuously. It was a much more efficient way to move stuff compared with her earlier method, with which she had to spend a great deal of time reducing the weight of each item. The new method also saved Hummingbird a lot of magic power. The only drawback, however, was that she needed to follow enchanted goods, which meant she could only move 2 items at a time. The paddle steamer heading to the west passed endless mountains and ridges. It arrived at Rocky Beach 2 days later. Last time, Roland took a bird's-eye view of this land from a distance on the Cloud Gazer. Now when he finally set foot on the beach, he found it was nothing but a vast and desolate wilderness. Rocky Beach, merely 10 miles apart from Shallow Beach, was a completely different world. There were animal remains embedded in layers of gravel and crushed stones all over the place, some of which had corroded due to exposure, while others were in the process of turning into new rocks. A few bones, which Roland failed to determine their owners, were quite big, almost in the same size of an adult. The steep precipice was also bizarre and mystic. Numerous sharp stalagmites grew out of the rock surfaces. Unlike the ones suspending from the top of the cave, these stalagmites, which looked like countless hooks hanging upside down at first glance, were all sticking out horizontally with their tails pointing to the ceiling. They were totally unbounded by the gravitational pull. Roland did not see them clearly last time on the balloon, but now, as he was personally on the beach, he felt the hair on the back of his neck all stood up at the sight of this disturbing view. No signs of life could be found on the long beach. No seagulls were nesting in the vicinity, and no seaweeds or clams were discovered either. Even at the rear of the rocks was an endless expanse of open country, as if Demon's red mist had taken away all the lives on this land. Roland and the others located the narrow crack leading to Devil's Town with the help of the marks left by Lotus. It was actually more of a fracture than a crack, as the gap, fathomless and confined, almost split the whole precipice in half. Lotus created a narrow path of 1.5 meters wide at the opening. When they stepped down the stairs and passed through the crevice, Nightingale involuntarily burst out an exclamation. "What's the matter?" Roland asked. "Look over there." She pointed to the bottomless crack. "There's a hole in the rocks." They all stopped and took a peek. Close to the inky bottom, Roland spotted several round holes, which seemed to be manually drilled. "What's that?" "I don't know. But I've seen similar holes in the impassable mountain range, except the ones there are slightly bigger." Nightingale hesitated for a moment and then said, "I feel something is looking at me deep down there. The deeper I probe, the stronger this feeling is." "Something?" Roland was a bit surprised. "There is more than one." Nightingale nodded. "In the valley on the way to the camps of the Witch Cooperation Association, there's a path leading to the bottom of the ground. I've never been down there. Take Sylvie to the impassable mountain range after she's back." Roland took another look at the bottom of the fracture, managing to suppress the desire to explore. He then ordered the team to continue to marshal forward. Although this continent was a part of Land of Dawn, on which human beings had settled as early as 1,000 years ago, they had a very minimal understanding of the world, as if mankind had deliberately forgotten to explore the outside world. Roland once told Agatha about drawing a map of the whole continent but was informed that the Union had done so for fertile plains. They had very roughly sketched out an outline of Land of Dawn. As to the land beyond, they knew nothing about it. That was why Roland fully supported Thunder to explore lands overseas. He had thought it would be a matter of time to understand the whole world, but now he realized he was ignorant of even his own territory, the Kingdom of Grey Castle in the western region. Unfortunately, he had to leave these thoughts behind for the time being, as the war against the church was pressing. They soon found themselves in an open field after passing through the crack. The first army who garrisoned there led them to their camps at once. Roland then saw Agatha and Soraya. "Where are Lightning and the others?" "She's flying around with Summer." Agatha sighed. "She's too perky to be quiet just for a second. Devil's Town has almost turned into her playland. It really would be a national park that you need to buy tickets to enter in the modern world," Roland exclaimed. "What did you say?" "No, nothing." Roland coughed to conceal his embarrassment. "I'll use the sigil of listening to ask her to come back. Now take me where the collapsed stone tower is." When the group of people reached the center of the relics, Lightning, Maggie, and Summer arrived just in time. "Lightning is landing." The blonde little girl slowly came down to the ground while stretching out her arms to the sides. She turned around and gave Roland a big hug. Roland did not know whether to laugh or to cry since Lightning had reached puberty. "Ah." Next Maggie joined, who stretched out her wings in the same way. She fell straight to the ground, almost shaking Summer off her back. Roland understood that Lightning was one of the youngest witches in the Witch Union. So, it kind of explained why she was always so airy and jaunty. Maggie, however, was an adult witch. It did not make sense that she still acted like a child. There was only one plausible explanation: Lightning's fluttering manner was somewhat contagious. "Since everybody's here, let's get started." Roland eyed Summer, whose legs were still trembling. "Yes, Your Majesty." Summer stumbled to the hole and closed her eyes. In a second, the large hole in the ground was replaced by a giant black stone tower. Meanwhile, the air was permeated with red mists as thick as blood. Roland stepped back involuntarily while at the same time holding his breath. This was what it looked like here 26 days ago, right before the incident, Agatha explained. If Summer traces back the time only once, she can maintain the illusion for nearly an hour. It thus allows us to see what exactly happened from the beginning to the end. "Where's that eye demon that you talked about?" "The one with eyeballs all over that will attract the demon's attention once it sees you?" Tilly asked curiously. "At the top of this stone tower." Agatha pointed to the high sky above. "The stone tower is too high for Summer to reach. We can't see it now." Roland looked up and found the space above the tower was blank, as if it had been chopped off. It appeared that Summer could only reconstruct the area within a radius of 5 meters. Just then, the ground started to shake. "It's coming!" Agatha shouted in a low voice. Chapter 600, A Shocking Event. "Coming? What's coming?" Before Roland had time to inquire about the details, the ground beneath had risen and cracked. The black stone tower was lifted into the air in a second. A giant gray monster jumped out of the crack and opened its huge crimson mouth, trying to devour the stone tower. The slimes on its skin spilled all over the place. As Summer could only reconstruct the scene but not sounds, Roland felt like he was watching a vivid but intense silent movie. The witches, who had never been to a theater, reacted more dramatically. They all cried out in fright and stepped back a few paces. Ashes even automatically pulled out her sword and stood in front of Tilly, in an attempt to protect her. What was more horrid, however, was that there was more than one monster. Underneath the black stone tower hid a tentacle monster, whose gleamy black body was almost completely fused with the stone tower, with only its tentacles poking out of the bottom of the tower like innumerable feet. Its scale, which glistened in a deep red light, was the only indication that the creature was alive. Tentacle Monster was pretty much as big as half of the castle, but it was incomparable to Megamouth Beast, who could engulf the entire tower. To avoid being swallowed, it strove to keep the Megamouth Beast from shutting the mouth by waving its tentacles. Meanwhile, clouds of blood mists that burst out of the scale started to gradually erode the skins of the beast. Evidently, the thick mist, almost of a black color, could cause harm to its rival. Nevertheless, the Megamouth Beast was simply too large to defeat only via the red mist corrosion. As the stone tower was lifted off the ground little by little, the tentacle monster was finally crushed by the tower and became the Megamouth Beast's food. After that, the black stone tower slowly slid into the giant mouth as well. In the end, Roland saw the eye demon, which appeared to take no notice of the Megamouth Beast and sat motionless at the top of the tower during the whole process of being gulped down without the slightest intention to escape. The illusion stopped at that moment. The red mists and the giant monsters vanished instantly. Peace was restored. They saw a massive hole in the ground and realized what they had seen did occur at some point in the past. Roland heaved a long sigh. He was further convinced that he had done the right thing not to include the soldiers from the First Army. His heart was beating so fast as if it were going to jump out of his chest while he was watching. Even if the movie was now over, the fear still lingered. "This is the wriggling monster that ate Miss Agatha's lab?" After a long silence, Tilly broke off. "Why would it attack the Devil's Town? We might be wrong earlier. It's probably not a demonic hybrid enslaved by demons. At least, it isn't controlled by the demons behind the snow-capped mountains." Roland looked at Agatha and said, "What do you think?" "I agree." Agatha nodded, apparently having been thinking about it for a long time. There were no records of this kind of demonic beast whatsoever during the 2 battles of Divine Will. If demons do have the ability to subjugate them, we won't be able to hold up long, and Tequila would have been devastated long before. Demons just need to order a few Megamouth Beasts to carry some senior demons and enter the city from the underground when launching an attack. If not demons, then who does? Tilly's brows furrowed. Judging from the transparent mantis that Miss Nightingale found, it's obvious that these demonic beasts have some sort of plans. Can't it be a random action? Nightingale spread out her hands. Hybrids are by no means ordinary demonic beasts. Based on their performances during the months of demons, they have already developed critical thinking skills. Perhaps they'll be even smarter than us if they live long enough. Everybody laughed at her comment and felt less strained at once. Clearly, nobody would believe that those savage monsters, which knew nothing but wrestling in muds, would be more intelligent than fed and clothed human beings. The idea just sounded too ridiculous. Only Roland remained silent. He gazed at the deep hole, dealing with crowding thoughts in his mind. Was mankind the most intelligent species? He would not be so presumptuous as to boldly assume mankind was the smartest creature, especially when he was currently in a completely foreign world. When the living environment and the requirement for necessities changed, what was considered to be intelligent might be distinctive as well. Take demonic beasts for example. They would certainly not regard silk and bread as essential. Why was the eye demon unresponsive? Andrea asked in confusion. Didn't you say the whole campground will be startled once it sees you? Because nobody saw it, Agatha explained. Eye demons will see us only after we see them. But to that Megamouth beast, it simply had no eyes. It has nothing but a big mouth. Because it doesn't need an eye. Roland continued, like an earthworm, the beast lives underground all the year round. It doesn't need an eye to see things. Naturally, it won't specially grow any light-sensitive organs. Grow, what? Tilly questioned curiously. Light-sensitive organs, such as eyes. Some animals use skins to detect light. Roland did not go further but squatted down and pointed to the deep hole. Lightning, do you want to go down there to take a peek? The little girl nodded immediately. That's too dangerous. Ashes attempted to stop her. We don't know what's hiding down there at all. You don't need to probe into the tunnel, but just look at where the beast is heading, Roland said, And Nightingale will stay here while monitoring magic reactions. It's going to be fine. Don't I need to follow it into the hole and catch it? Lightning pouted. Not this time. He devoured demons after all, not Agatha. Roland stressed once again. Get out of there and report to me right after you find where the tunnel leads. Do you understand? Yes. Lightning took out a portable torch from her knapsack and plunged into the deep hole after lighting the torch. The exit is over here. After a few minutes, Lightning's voice came out of the magic stone. Do you see the torchlight? Nightingale soon found out the direction in which the tunnel ran based on the location of the torch. It's good now. You can come up. Roland's brows deepened when he glanced at Nightingale, who was standing to the southeast of the hole, and the lofty snow-capped mountains behind her. Apparently, someone shared the same view. It looks like we were indeed wrong. Tilly shrugged. The wriggling demonic beast we met in the misty forest did not intend to go to the Devil's Town, but maybe to this snow-capped mountain? It seems so. Roland looked up. The summit of the mountain loomed against puffs of clouds. The snow on its peak shimmered in the rays of sunlight. It appears that we have to thoroughly look into this highest mountain in the western region.